Hello everyone, I'm Michael Serapio. Thank you for joining us as CPAC brings you special coverage today of His Majesty King Charles and Queen Camilla's visit to Canada. Now, the Canadian Forces plane carrying the Sovereign expected to touch down in just a few minutes' time. And with the King's arrival, the start of a very busy 24 hours for their Majesties in the nation's capital, King Charles coming to Ottawa and upon the invitation of the Prime Minister to officially open Parliament with the reading of the throne speech tomorrow. Now, ahead of that, we will see several events today that will also mark Charles's first Canadian homecoming since becoming king. And for the Prime Minister, reasserting Canada's sovereignty by highlighting both historic and current ties with the Crown, which is, of course, of note because of the U.S. President, Donald Trump, being a great admirer of the monarchy, but Trump also rankling Canadians right across the country by calling our border with the United States artificial, and continues to make the argument that Canada would be better off as the 51st state. Comments that have essentially precipitated a number of events, all leading to today, the King of Canada arriving in the nation's capital. And we do have special coverage planned for you today to help make that happen. I'm happily joined right now by my co-host Catherine Lafrance, right beside her, royal commentator and advisor Bonnie Brownlee. Also joining us today, Laurie Turnbull, political science professor from Dalhousie University, and Geneviève Tellier, un politologue avec l'Université d'Ottawa. Hello to all of you.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
So listen, we're gonna have a very fulsome discussion. We have about 4 hours of programming to go through as we follow the King through the nation's capital. But before we begin our discussion, I do want to go right now to Canada's official reception center. This is at Hangar 11, right across from the Ottawa International Airport. That's where the King and Queen will soon land. And where right now, as you can see, CPAC's Andrew Thompson is standing by, taking it all in. Andrew, hello to you. I can hear the music in the background. What's happening right now?
Well, Michael, yes, the band is warming up, the central band of the Canadian Armed Forces. You can see behind me a number of local students are getting in place. They're part of the welcoming party, and we are expecting the King's arrival in about 15 minutes. That's at 1:15 p.m. Eastern, and there's going to be about a 15-minute welcoming ceremony here at the Ottawa Airport. There's going to be an arrival guard that is just getting in place, 25 members of the Royal Canadian Dragoons. This is the senior armored regiment in the Canadian Armed Forces. It's actually a regiment that King Charles is the colonel-in-chief of. We're also going to see, and you might be able to see it in the video footage here at the airport, the Sovereign's flag of Canada is going to be raised actually right behind our position here. There are 2 Royal Canadian Dragoons waiting to perform that task. That is the King's official colors, and it only flies in Canada in the presence of the monarch. So that is some of the military pageantry you're going to see. In terms of the greeting party underneath these very clear and sunny skies here at the airport, you are going to see Governor General Mary Simon and her spouse Whit Fraser. The Prime Minister is here, Mark Carney. He and his spouse Diana Fox-Carney are also part of this welcoming contingent, along with several Indigenous leaders from First Nations, Inuit and Métis communities, and the Lieutenant Governor of Ontario also taking part. And as I mentioned, there are a lot of local students here from both the Ontario and Quebec sides of the border here in the national capital region. So a lot of activity going on right now, a lot of media, of course, a lot of security, Michael, and a lot of military personnel and government officials making sure this all goes according to plan.
It goes according to plan, and luckily the weather is cooperating today for people who've been around the capital region the last few days. It's been very cold and wet, but as you can see, the sun is shining. Temperatures have warmed up as we take a look right now. The Governor General saying hello to some of the students assembled there with her spouse, getting ready to welcome the King to Canada and to Ottawa. And of course, we'll keep an eye on what is happening on the ground at Hangar 11. The plane, we are expecting it to land somewhere between the next 6 to 15 minutes. And of course, we'll have that here for you on CPAC. But as we wait, let's begin our discussion right now. And Bonnie Brownlee, as I say, royal advisor, royal commentator, happy to have you on the program today. I was noting off top how this visit is important for the Prime Minister, so much so that Mark Carney, in his first news conference after winning the general election, announced the fact that King Charles would be in Canada to read the throne speech. So important for the PMO, but how does Buckingham Palace view this visit, would you say?
Important. I mean, he wouldn't be here if they didn't think it was important. And the Prime Minister would have spoken to the King about it when he was in London 5-6 weeks ago, just before he called the election. They're friends. They have a relationship from years in London together when he was the governor of the bank. And I think the King's probably been looking for a reason to come to Canada, especially with all the issues with the US, Trump, and tariffs. And I think everyone was trying to find the right sort of political avenue for it. Even though this is a royal visit, this is a political visit without politics.
A political visit without politics. And what you're alluding to, I believe, is the meeting back in February with the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, because certainly that touched off some controversy in this country when Keir Starmer hand-delivered to President Trump an invitation to meet with the King at Balmoral Castle at the same time that Donald Trump was saying that Canada should, was questioning rather, whether Canada should be part of the United States.
Yeah, so the visit is also about, we're not part of the United States, right? We are part of the Commonwealth. We are part of a larger European, we have our own allies, so we can step outside of the United States. And I think the King is here to help do that. It's a bit, he's part of the toolbox of things that's helping Canada deal with the United States of America. And we're speaking to our own sovereignty and to who we are as Canadians and what we want moving forward. So the King is here to do that. Coming in for 24 hours, almost unheard of. And I can only imagine what his staff have been through at the palace in the last 4 or 5 weeks. To change the King's diary is not a simple task, right? So they would be, but that's how important it is. That's why he's here.
So quite the Herculean task for Buckingham Palace to change the ship, if you will. But Laurie, I'm going to bring you in here because for full disclosure, you have an inside track on this information, as your spouse is the King's Secretary here in Canada. So as best you can answer the question, what has it been like for Canadian officials to get things in place for this visit? As Bonnie said, a political statement without being overtly political.
Oh, absolutely, right? And I think we're not necessarily used to, in Canada, having a whole bunch of international media be very interested in our speech from the throne. We have a hard enough time getting Canadians to be really interested in the speech from the throne, but now it's a big moment because the King is going to be here, and the King is certainly in the middle of this, not a bad way, but in the middle of this moment where we actually have to state our sovereignty. We have to make a point about it. It's been a long time since we've had to worry about whether the U.S. understood we're a sovereign country. And so it's hard sometimes to figure out how to do that. And so I think because the King is the head of state of Canada, sometimes we think about the King as being like a foreign monarch kind of thing, but the King is the head of state in Canada. He is our King too. And so I think by being here to make this speech and to be with us in this way, it's putting a very fresh face in a way on this government. I think the Prime Minister wants to take this moment to say, look, this is a new government, this is a new Prime Minister, this is a new moment. He's pressing reset on the whole thing. And again, it's drawing attention to something that I think, even though it's important, it tends to kind of slip people's minds a lot of the time. The speech from the throne is not the highlight of the year most of the time.
Unless you're a political nerd like us here at CPAC.
Right.
Just say, but but I think that's very important to underline here. Many Americans, and I think Donald Trump arguably is one of them, thinks that it's so easily transferable to put the Republican system that exists in the United States, and by that a republic, not necessarily the Republican Party, but a republic system up against the system we have in this country, a parliamentary democracy, a constitutional monarchy, underlined right now by the head of that constitutional monarchy making his way to Canada. Although, as I say that, Catherine, we know that there are critics here in Canada, among them members of the Bloc Québécois, who've already made a decision as to how they're going to move forward with the throne speech tomorrow.
Alors oui, effectivement, il se pourrait qu'il
yes,
n'assiste pas
it's quite possible that they did not attend the throne speech while the King is delivering it. There's grumbling in the sovereignist movement that the Bloc's part of. The Parti Québécois weighed into this as well. They don't like the fact that the King is here. They don't like the fact that Canada is part of this constitutional monarchy system for evident reasons, as we just explained. Then, in Quebec, like elsewhere in Canada, do people like the monarchy and the king? Depends who you talk to, depends who you're talking about as well. I think many people love the Queen, especially in Quebec as well. But there's not the same popularity for Charles. Will that change? Perhaps his visit will change something. We don't know. But Mark Carney didn't invite the king to galvanize public opinion, but really to send a message to the U.S. and more specifically to various countries, to the international world about Canadian politics. And what's interesting, if you allow a couple of figures very quickly, a couple of polls, very different polls that have been conducted over the past few days. If you look at the anti-monarchy sentiment in Quebec, according to Léger, it was 71%. According to CBC, it's now 59%. So things have changed. It depends on the year you're talking about and the events. So we'll see after this very, very short visit. We'll see if anything changes about that feeling.
As you say, you know, the very fact that the king is here is not about galvanizing Canadian opinion necessarily around the monarchy, but essentially sending a message. Geneviève, what would you say to that?
Oui, je pense que ça, je vais faire du pouce sur ce que Laurie a
I'll
dit.
just pick
Ça
up on what
va
Laurie
attirer
said.
énormément de médias étrangers.
It's brought in a lot of international media. It's going to help Canada's cause. As to Donald Trump, that's the main strategy behind Mark Carney's decision, I think. It's not really to warm Canadians' hearts to the monarchy. No, it's really, you don't need to bring the king in to do that, but it's designed to show the rest of the world that Canada is an important player, that figures, including the king, come here. And I think that's the main goal of this visit. We'll have to see what happens and whether that works. But really, Canada's speaking to the rest of the world. I'd just like to pick up on what Catherine said earlier. The Parti Québécois tabled a motion to abolish the swearing of allegiance to the king. There's a New Brunswick MP that's been calling for the same thing federally. Some people this year have brought this up again, but like for everything else, it's become secondary. It's really national unity that's important right now, and that's what the king represents in Canada. Should federal MPs swear allegiance to the king? We won't be having a debate on that this week, but it is something that might come up again. And Canada's not the only Commonwealth country to have done this. There are many other countries also that have asked themselves the question about the need of this system. And I would end with a bit of a story. Laurie, you said it's not very often that we have the media of the world with their eyes on Canada, but this does happen for various festivals in Montreal and Toronto, but generally it's not for political events.
Here at CPAC, always, all the time. But, you know, it is interesting what you're raising, though, because it is, as you're referencing, this moment of nationalism. And Donald Trump has almost reminded many Canadians of the existence and the importance of Canadian nationalism to them. And I'm sure, Bonnie, that the Crown and Buckingham Palace is very aware of that as well.
For sure. I mean, look, Mark Carney won. Basically, Trump was very helpful in tariffs, and as we know, the Poilievre team didn't pivot to tariffs, right? So there's all that.
I'm going to ask you to just pause for 1 second. I just want to show people the fact that the Canadian Forces plane carrying the King and Queen Camilla has now landed at Ottawa Airport, and it will take some time before they get to the Welcome Centre, but the plane has landed. This is at the Ottawa International Airport, now taxiing its way to Hangar 11, which is the parlance here in the nation's capital. For the official Welcome Centre here in Ottawa. But I'm sorry to interrupt there, Bonnie. You were saying as we wait for the plane to taxi over to the actual welcome area.
Well, the tariffs were a big issue, and they did remind Canadians that we don't want to be the 51st state, and we didn't like Trudeau being called the governor. So I think that, you know, Canadians, I hope, are stepping up and starting to pay attention to their heritage, and this is part of it. And if it can help us as we move forward as a country with a new government, hopefully with a good new mandate that we've seen the Prime Minister announced a few days ago, that it's going to be worthwhile to us for the king to be here today. And you know, I think it is, because I do see a lot of young people in the crowds. I know they were probably invited. It's a school. But they're there and they actually look interested, and they wanted to shake the hand of the Governor General. That's a good sign if they actually know who these people are.
Absolutely a good sign. And you know, I want to rewind back a bit to how Buckingham Palace was looking for this opportunity, because since that February visit, certainly the palace must have been aware of the outrage, if you will, here in the country, the very fact that Keir Starmer had hand-delivered this invitation. And we've seen more subtle hints that they wanted to stand up for Canada. Can you talk a bit about those hints, Bonnie?
Well, I think the king was looking for a way to come to Canada. You know, what's the right timing? And again, his health has, you know, interfered with some of that. They had to cancel one trip before. But I think when you're the king and you're ahead of the Commonwealth, and Canada is an important realm, you actually have to step up and do the job. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we're seeing today. And it's a win-win for everybody. It's a win for Carney, it's a win for the monarchy, it should be a win for Canadian citizens that they're all kind of coming together and doing this. And I find too that some of the events that he's doing, the one he's going to Lansdowne, they're very exposed events for him to be doing. So I think there is also a sense of trying to make him look a bit more approachable and available to people when he goes through the crowds today.
And picking up a bit on what you hinted at, you know, no easy matter for His Majesty, because he has been undergoing chemotherapy,
Yes.
dealing with cancer.
And we, as you know, they live by their royal diaries things are set out for months and years ahead of time of what their schedules will be like. So switching up stuff at the last minute has to be something of extreme importance.
Absolutely. As we now watch the plane get that much closer to the Welcome Center, let's just take in the moment right now. This is Hangar 11, the official reception center for Canada here in Ottawa at the International Airport. And as the jetway makes its way to the front door of the Canadian Forces plane that has carried the King and the Queen to Ottawa, we can tell you that they will, once making their way down, be greeted by 2 members of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. There's also a 25-member honor guard from the Royal Canadian Dragoons, for which His Majesty is Colonel-in-Chief. And also the music that you heard a little bit earlier in the background with Andrew as they were practicing, well, that is the central band of the Canadian Armed Forces. And interesting to note, as we see now the Governor General making her way over to greet their Majesty. She's accompanied there to her left by His Excellency Whit Fraser, her partner, Prime Minister Mark Carney. You also saw there in the background. And here we see the delegation making their way over to the stairs. And, you know, Laurie, I'm going to bring you in here because as I read the official notes here of the program for this visit, I can't help but note the fact that the Canadian Secretary to the King,
Yes.
Donald Booth,
Yes.
is also amongst those who will be greeting
right.
the King and the Queen.
Yes, exactly. And so, yeah, I'm sort of watching the door here, like, wow, you know, any minute it will open, and he will be maybe the first, if very closely after, to come out. And I think, And yeah, I mean, this has been a huge amount of preparation ever since the King and the Prime Minister decided that this was going to happen. There's coordination, obviously, from Buckingham Palace with the Privy Council office, which is where Don's position is centered, and also, obviously, with the Prime Minister's office. Also with the Department of Canadian Heritage, because they're the ones who are actually doing the planning for the whole thing. With the Senate, obviously, because the speech from the throne is read in the Senate. So just a huge amount of just, you know, right down to the detailed planning, everything for all these people who are involved. And yeah, it is fascinating to see what goes into it.
Fascinating, and when Bonnie, you referenced the fact that it's no small matter to change a royal diary, you think of the diaries that have all been altered for this moment. The prime ministers, the governor generals. We also will see Indigenous leadership welcoming the royals to Ottawa. So really a number of diaries being flipped around for this to happen as we see that door now opening.
Well, I remember visits with Prime Minister Mulroney when the royals were coming or we were going there, and we had plenty of time to prepare for this, like weeks or months. This is a whole other different thing, all the work that, you know, goes into it.
What does it say about Mark Carney's global influence that he was able to reach out to Buckingham Palace in this moment and essentially made this request and granted by the King?
There's no question he has a global impact. Mark Carney, his reputation, being governor of, you know, both banks here and in the UK, also being part of the social circle in London. So he and the King would have met each other on many occasions, right? At whatever, cocktails, dinners, other events and functions. Carney would have been invited to a lot of things and has strong roots there from Oxford. But I think the whole Goldman Sachs background, the education, the work in finance, there was clearly a feeling that Canadians started to feel a bit safe with him in terms of my bank account and my future. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's paid off well. And he had the courage to say to the King, if I win, will you come and open Parliament for me? I mean, you know, we have to remember too, King Charles is a nice, normal human being as well. Like, you know, people tend to be afraid and step back and, you know, get intimidated by them. But in the end, they are people, and he is very political. He understands, King Charles knows global issues as well as anybody else, but he can't always speak publicly about it. So that's why his speech tomorrow will be interesting, to see how far he dips in.
Et il comprend le roi sans aucun doute l'importance que tout ça
The King understands that this is very, very important for the Trump administration, for Donald Trump himself as well. Donald Trump is keeping an eye on this, so you can imagine that he's watching it on TV. It does have an impact, and Genevieve, you were saying earlier, Donald Trump is the type of president who loves this type of ceremony. He's not insensitive to this, is he? I'm very surprised that the King is only here for a very short time. I thought he might have stayed longer. But there are other considerations, of course. First of all, it hasn't been well received by everyone. People are asking who will pay for this. This was the first question. It's always a grievance, isn't it? And then there's the issue of Quebec, of course. The support for the monarchy and the royalty is not as high. And the King's diary, the King's agenda, if you're trying to plan a visit of several days in length, it's going to take quite a while to change things around. But I think that we will see enough of the King to influence Mr. Trump. And Mr. Trump listened to the Canadian election night results, and he talked about that. And that's quite something from an American president to actually mention that. So I'm sure he's watching this. We were talking about the international media, the New York Times this morning, before Charles arrived in Canada, which was saying, this is what we have to know about King Charles's visit to Canada. He said everything it's all to do with Trump. It's all about Trump.
Side or not, as you know, Bonnie was referencing early, this is also a moment perhaps for Canadians to re-embrace their nationalism and to re-embrace the fact that, you know, constitutionally we are a constitutional monarchy, and there you have now His Majesty King Charles, Queen Camilla with him as they descend down the stairs. Let's take a listen now as to what is happening at the official reception center by the Ottawa International Airport. And there you see His Majesty having just said hello to the Governor General and her partner, Whit Fraser, now shaking hands with Prime Minister Carney's wife, Diana Fox Carney. And along this line, you'll see many leaders of Indigenous communities. Just to the right of your screen there, Cindy Woodhouse-Nepanak, National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations. We'll also see Natan Obed further down the line, the President of the Inuit Tapirit Kanatami. We'll also see Victoria Pruden, the President of the Métis National Council, as well as the Honourable Edith Dumont, Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, Tony Viscardi, spouse of the Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, and Chief Greg Sarazin, Chief of the Algonquins Pikwakanagan First Nation. So this is the official reception line as their majesties have now arrived in Ottawa. Let's take one more listen to what's happening at the official welcome center at the Ottawa Airport. And you're watching special coverage right now on CPAC as we look at the official reception being extended to His Majesty King Charles III and Queen Camilla. They have just arrived in Ottawa for a quick 24-hour visit, but without a doubt an important visit, as he will be reading, the King will be reading the speech from the throne tomorrow. You know, and as we see the King greeting all these students who have gathered around Bonnie, I'm wondering what has stuck out for you already, because immediately it seems that the King and the Queen are very happy to be here. They seem very much enjoying this moment in the nation's capital.
Well, I do think there's a sincere love for this country, you know, for a long time, as even for the King when he was a small child. So I think they are happy to be in a place that probably feels safe to some extent as well, right? And the crowds are so far reasonable. We'll see what it looks like when they start to travel down to Lansdowne Park. But again, we are important to the monarchy. We're important as one of the leading countries in the Commonwealth, and they have good memories from being here. And it's a happy time for him and Camilla, even though he's going through health issues. You know, I think they are a lot more appreciative of things in life since this and since their illness. You know, I certainly know that for the Princess of Wales, she's less about people knowing what she's wearing and more about what she's doing. And a lot of that has come from her illness. And I'm assuming to some extent, when you're a king and you're that king, you probably really want to make a different kind of impact at this point in your life and to be relevant to the citizens that you look after globally.
Well, and as you say that, you know, we have to note the fact that when, for example, he was greeted, when he was brought over by the Governor General to the young people playing the Indigenous drums, he took his time in that moment. He didn't walk away, and he really was absorbing the moment. What do you say about that?
Well, I mean, Indigenous communities in general have always felt a loyalty to the monarch and not the Prime Minister or the government of the day, because they come and go. The monarchy has been their relationship, who they signed most of their treaties with back historically. And I should be careful with all these fabulous historians here, but yes, I mean, he would feel that that is something that is important, and it is the makeup of our country. Mm-hmm. And he's respectful of it. And when you see young children that are actually happy to look at you as a king in your 70s, you've got to be appreciative of that as well, right? Okay, hopefully I'm making a difference right now, connecting with this child.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I'm going to circle back to that in a moment, but, you know, Laurie, Geneviève, I don't know if you want to comment on that, because we did see, for example, Indigenous leadership amongst those welcoming the King and the Queen to Ottawa, and it has been noted there is a nation-to-nation relationship when it comes to the treaty signed, because they were signed not with Canada, but with the Crown.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's a very important relationship. It's a very, obviously, historically significant relationship. And I think it's an issue that has been very important to the King, and he's been vocal about that. And so I think, you know, not knowing what it's like to be inside his head, I would think that that would probably be a pretty significant part of the welcome for him. And I'm not at all surprised to see him stop and really pay attention to that. And I think, honestly, as a country, it's whatever one thinks about the monarchy, and I know that there are a lot of opinions about that, it's a moment for us to reflect on the fact that we are not the United States. We don't have a republic. We have an institutional system of government that comes from somewhere. Of course, there's back and forth about whether a system of government is a right way. That's a good conversation. We should always have those conversations. But knowledge of how our system works, the fact that there is a head of state, a head of a government, they are separate, not like the United States. We have an apolitical head of state. Those things are an important part of how we govern ourselves, and good for us to know that. It's like if people get nothing else from this visit, just the fact to reflect on how our system actually works.
Yes, of course. No.
I'm so sorry. Je pense que les images parlent aussi, parce que
I think the pictures speak for themselves. What have we seen since the plane landed? We've seen King Charles and Queen Camilla come down the steps, talk to people, shake hands, receive gifts. It's relatively laid back for a royal visit. Of course, he's just arrived. It won't be like that throughout his visit. There are official functions, of course. But it's relatively laid back. It's very friendly. Mary Simon, the Governor General, is speaking to them, and I think that really reflects Canadian politics. because this is a place where ordinary people and journalists have easy access to dignitaries, to politicians, to the Prime Minister, to the premiers, the provincial premiers. This isn't what we see in other countries. And what we've seen today really reflects that. Laurie was quite right in what she said, and what this visit means. It also means that is trying to show the way Canadians are. Many people who come to Canada will say things are very easy here, access is easy. That's what people will tell you. Genevieve. Well, there's a contrast with the U.S. We often hear that the U.S. is a model. For us, it's strange. Checks and balances, for example. That's how the U.S. works. But this isn't the case right now. Our parliamentary system is in the forefront today. It's in the limelight. There are good parts to it. We've often been critical of it, starting with the King. I think we have to demystify the role of the King. A very protocol-based role, of course, but not only that. The Prime Minister is accountable to Parliament. All ministers have to be elected. It's not necessarily the case in presidential democracies like the U.S. Canadians love their parliamentary democracy, and we should take greater pains to explain it to Canadians. It has its advantages.
Only because I'm noting the fact that the Honour Guard is now leaving the Canadian Forces plane that did carry the royal couple to Ottawa. And as you were seeing as we were talking here, the motorcade has actually left the Ottawa airport. And if you're wondering why they have left, well, as Bonnie was alluding to, their next stop is actually a place known as Lansdowne Park. That's a 40-acre cultural and social center here in the nation's capital. There you see it right there. This is the heart of Lansdowne Park, and already you see hundreds of people gathered waiting to see the King and the Queen. A very busy 24 hours, a number of stops, squeezing in a royal tour, which arguably would have been days in past into 24 hours. And Bonnie, again, this goes to what you were saying about having to shift schedules in order to accommodate this trip to Canada. But you know, I do want to get your opinion, Bonnie, because you are a royal advisor. You've been on the front lines. You have seen the general public interacting with the royal family, and whether one is blasé about them, whether one holds them in high regard, what's that moment like when someone, even a cynic, gets to meet a member of the royal family, in this case, the head of the royal family?
It's a moment. I mean, for all of us as young political staffers, the first time we met the Queen, it was more about, okay, we have to get through the first meeting and not stand and stare at her. You know, it's like, how do I keep my, you know, and this is 35 years ago. Like, we were young and and we were impressed by her, but
we still are.
We still are, and we're still young, right? And but I must say that they were very kind to all of us. Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth would look right at you in the eye, and sometimes reach out a hand. And I think it's because they understood that we were new, it was a new government. Mulroney formed the government in September of '84, and we met the Queen 2 months later, when she, so it was just all kind of a whirlwind for us. And then you kind of then you're like, okay, now I've got my grip on this, we can all, but yeah, I found them to be very, almost normal in that sense, because they know that people are intimidated, so they do actually try to make you feel comfortable.
And I will say, because I've covered a few royal tours over a couple of royal visits, including one in Toronto with both at the time Prince Charles and Camilla, and she, as she stood in the sidelines, always had this wonderful sense of humor. Would keep things very light and happy. There's one in this visit that was days. There was one day where it was cold and raining, and she was the one raising people's spirits, which I thought, and that's the royal entourage and the journalists and the public waiting there. She was raising everyone's spirits, which I thought, to her credit.
The British correspondents, the ones that they've all been there a long time. Like, they tend to do these jobs, and it's taken quite seriously in the UK. We're not there yet. We still kind of roll our eyes a bit, but they have come to really like Queen Camilla, because she is kind and friendly and funny and can help move a trip along and can help keep the king happy. Everybody likes a good queen or wife if she can keep the status quo and keep it all rolling on the bus and on the airplanes and keep it all happy. So it's the press corps in the UK in many ways that have turned her into the good, kind person that she is. They were, everybody was upset about Princess Diana, but now that they've got over it, and in many ways she's more royal than the royals. She gets it, and both the Queen and Prince Philip, Laurie probably knows this better than I, liked her very much because she understood the role of being Queen Consort, and she never took the name Princess of Wales, as she was entitled to, out of respect for Princess Diana. So, she's pretty smart in her own strategy in how to become queen.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll continue the conversation in a moment, but I did mention Lansdowne Park. That is the next stop for the King and the Queen. It's about a 10 or 15-minute drive, but as we saw, people already gathered there. And in amongst the crowd, our very own Remy Autier. Remy, nice to see you there at Lansdowne Park. How are things looking right now?
Michael, there is really a great enthusiasm here from the Canadian public because this event in Lansdowne Park might be the moment where the subject of His Majesty, the King, the Canadian public might be able to be closest to their king. Some people have been waiting since 10 o'clock this morning, and this crowd has really grown in the last 1 or 2 hours, where we now see about I would say about 500 people, and people are coming in, and there's a sense of excitement about seeing the King and the Queen in person. Is it because they have watched The Crown, the TV show, and they are now enthusiastic to see them in the flesh? But there are really some people that I talked to for whom the King is important, the royals are important. There are people from Perth, a community in Ontario, that feel that their royalty, the monarchy, is really present. The Union Jack flies, they say, a lot in the street. There's also a couple I've met, they're from London, and this will be the time they'll be closest to the King that lives most of the time in their own city. They just happen to be traveling and visiting their son here in Ottawa. So the excitement is growing. There will be many cultural activity. The theme here is to offer the King a joyful look at Canada's identity and diversity. So we will see a lot of elements that are maybe not traditionally Canadian, but are really a display of our capacity to unite people. We must mention there are some protesters, people that have been protesting in the convoy a few years ago, that have also protested at some of the trial from some of the convoy participants and leaders. They arrived early, but with the crowd growing, they have seemed to be drowned out in their message that seems to be opposing the King and their political message. I'll tell you that really the vibe here, the feeling is that this is not a political event. This is a moment where people want to see the King and the Queen in Canada, in their own Ottawa capital, and then we will see them coming here. They will meet some vendors. We're trying to reenact, the farmers market that you might know if you come to Ottawa on the weekend. There are some vendors that have been set up. The King and Queen will see some of the local products. Maple syrup, of course, will be on display here, and other goods from different culture. And then they'll be shown different performances coming, like I say, from different culture. So expectation is high, the mood is happy here, and really people can't wait to see the King and Queen. We've seen, I'll finish with that, but the infant children with flowers, eager to be able to give them to the King or the Queen if they come and shake their hand or meet them in person. A lot of people are hoping that today.
Okay, Remy, thank you for that. CPAC's Remy Autier at Lansdowne Park. The next stop for His Majesty the King and Queen Camilla, we are, I'm told, they're only about 5 minutes away. But then again, this is Ottawa. You never know about traffic in this city, so we'll see. Yeah, exactly. Welcome to the nation's capital. But I do want to pick up on an interesting note there that Remy was talking about how the political message of the protesters is being drowned out by the enthusiasm enthusiasm of the people gathered there at Lansdowne Park. And it does underline the fact that this is a non-political event welcoming the King and the Queen. It almost takes on almost a Canada Day flavor in welcoming them to the nation's capital, although obviously there's still a political role somewhat in this, and that he will be reading the speech from the throne written by the government tomorrow, Laurie.
Yes, exactly. I mean, the King's role is not to come and have his own political space kind of thing, but obviously the whole moment is not outside a political context. It's very much within a political context. And we're a democracy. People are allowed to protest. And so, hey, you know, as long as it's peaceful, if people have something that they want to say and they want to put that in front of the King when he's here, that's part of being a democracy.
Et on a le droit de ne pas aimer la monarchie, la royauté et le
People
système
have
dans
the
lequel
right
on
to
vit.
not to like the monarchy, the system we live in, but I would add, you have the right not to like it, but you have to do it based on knowledge. I'd like to pick up on what you said, Genevieve. Do we really teach the use of the monarchy, its role? And when we've kept this system in Canada, we could have gotten rid of it. We could have changed it. We've kept it. There are reasons for that. You talked about your students, but I think we should teach kids about it before university. There's very few explanations in the media about this as well. So I think we should really find out what it's all about, what its use is, what it protects us from, what are the good sides, the bad sides of it, how much does it cost? That's the question people always ask. How much does it cost to keep the monarchy? But then once you have that information, you should be able to decide whether you want to keep it or get rid of it. But it looks like currently and for some time, especially in Quebec and elsewhere, that people don't like the royal family because it's fashionable not to like them, in fact. Do you agree with that, Genevieve? People say they want to get rid of them, but as soon as there's a royal event, people are very interested in it. It's very popular.
Et là, c'est l'engouement.
Oui, effectivement.
You know, you only have to think about the Crown or the House of Cards. The original one is British, of course. Remember that.
C'est intéressant parce que j'entendais les protestations justement.
Well, I heard Remy talk about the protesters who are on site. King Charles is used to that. It also happens in the United Kingdom as well. We have very similar systems, the UK and Canada. We understand each other very well, better than we understand the Americans. Of course, we understand the Americans, but we don't have the same system at all as the US. So I think we can have a dialogue. Mr. Carney wants that dialogue. Canadians want that dialogue as well to move us through the chaos that we're currently facing on the international stage. We understand the American system very well. I'm not sure we really understand why the Americans adopted that system and why we have a different system.
House of Cards was better. Just putting it out there. It's just putting it out there. But you know, what is interesting when you talk about continuity, when you talk about the ties that bind and how it is different for the United States. You know, rewind back to the very fact that once Mark Carney was chosen as the Liberal leader and became Prime Minister, you know, as the caretaker prime, well, not yet the election, but became Prime Minister at that moment in time. You know, his first visits were to France. His first visits were to England. He then strikes a defense deal of an over-the-radar system with Australia. And all of that goes to the fact that Canada does have historic relationships. We don't have a history of isolationism as the United States has had. We don't have the history of trying to create our own empire as the United States has done through Manifest Destiny, which Donald Trump referenced in his inaugural speech. But what we do have are ties that bind through the Commonwealth, countries like Australia and New Zealand, obviously the United Kingdom, and the very fact that we all have as our head of state, King Charles, who's now here in this moment. You know, Bonnie, talk to us about the power of those ties that bind for Canada, because, you know, I think it's easy to think of us, because we are a part of North America, it's easy to think of us as the United States' closest neighbor and, you know, up until this point, its #1 trading partner. But beyond that, there's a deeper history, and those relationships abide.
Well, I think Carney represents, he's building a government that's going to go to work. So he's reminding us of the ties that bind, that we've had historically, but we've spent so much time in politics in the last few years bullying and fighting and doing a lot of mean jabs at each other. He doesn't want that kind of parliament or that kind of government. So he understands global markets. He understands. He's got international relationships. So he's going to go out and fight for that, right? And try to stay out of literally the gutter of politics.
And the importance of having allies.
Exactly, and elevated. And he has the contacts. Any prime minister would. If Pierre Poilievre was prime minister, he would be able to make phone calls as well. Carney's in, I would say, a little bit of a different, because he already has those relationships. And, you know, he said it from day one, I'm going to work. I'm going to get to work to get things done, and I think that's what this government is trying to do. They're going to have all kinds of bumps and lumps, and, you know, nothing's going to be perfect. But, you know, and certainly not for Western Canada, but I think he has raised the narrative to a better civility for us to sort of discuss politics with each other. Not every premier is going to agree with that, Quebec and the West, but I think all you can do at this point is try. And the King is part and parcel of this elevation of letting Canada be represented as she is. We are a great country. We are part of the G7, 8, or whatever whichever number it's called
G7.
these days. And so I think a lot of us are starting to appreciate what he's doing in this effort.
And we'll see how long that goes. Certainly, on a political side, the players have changed. There's no more Justin Trudeau.
Right.
There's no more Jagmeet Singh. At this moment in time, Pierre Poilievre does not have a seat in the House of Commons. So it'll be interesting to see how it formulates.
Well, and when I look at this crowd, I see democracy working. Right, there will be protesters, but this is a happy crowd. I've worked in emerging democracies around the world as a volunteer in Yemen and Kosovo and places like that. We should be so proud to be Canadians and be able to, welcome a king into our land, whether we like him or not, and treat him with some respect and dignity that he deserves.
On est un peu en train de montrer au monde,
I think
et sans
we're
doute aux
showcasing to the world and to the Americans how different we are from the Americans. The election campaign was based specifically on that. Our Prime Minister wants to restore respect. We don't have a Prime Minister who speaks to people as the American president does. You can't compare the two. The way they speak is totally different. We also have a country, and as you've said, who's invited the king, even if not everybody likes the king, and the king has to accept, and not everybody is happy to see him. And I think that's a demonstration to the U.S. Democrat or Republican, of who we are. Well, the Americans look at what's happening here. I'm not so sure of that. Normally, the Americans don't spend much time thinking about what's happening in Canada and Canadian politics, but I think other countries have an eye on what's going on here in Canada. One of the questions they have is, what is Canada doing to avoid being Americanized? We share North American with the Americans. We have the same issues, the Americans, but Canada, unlike other countries, think of France, Germany, Italy, and the like. We have not indulged in populism like in other countries where there are many right-wing parties, and foreign countries are intrigued by that. People are wondering how we've been able to avoid that. What are the lessons we can learn from you? I think that's why they're keeping an eye on us or watching us closely.
I'm actually going to ask the control room. Let's take a full frame shot here of what's happening at Lansdowne Park, because, obviously the United Kingdom has its own history of multiculturalism, its history in terms of empire around the world. But this is the diversity representation that will be greeting King Charles as well as Camilla when they arrive at Lansdowne Park. We are seeing members of the Mexican community, of the South Asian community, and this will be a chance, as Remy was saying earlier on, a chance for Charles and Camilla to see a snapshot of this country, if you will, as represented by communities here in the nation's capital, vendors as well, the diversity that will be displayed not only in the people and in the music and in the dance that they will see in the very brief time at Lansdowne Park, but also in the food that will be shared, because again, as Remy said earlier, Lansdowne Park, while a cultural venue, oftentimes is a gathering place for people in the capital where they can go through farmers markets and take part in really locally food from around the world as well as locally grown food. And of course, what is more local than hockey? We'll also see a bit of that, as I believe the official schedule has the King actually dropping the ball, the puck, if you will, for these young hockey players. They'll be playing street hockey, though, not be playing inside TD Centre, which is home to Ottawa's PWHL team, the Ottawa Charge, and also the stadium above, which is home to the Ottawa Red Blacks. But as you can see, the entourage, or rather the convoy leading with His Majesty the King and Camilla, are now arriving at Lansdowne Park. Let's just take in some of the atmosphere, the hundreds of people that have gathered on this beautiful day in Ottawa to welcome the King and the Queen. And just a quick note that is Stephen Guilbeault, who is greeting both the King and the Queen, the Minister of Canadian Identity, Culture, and Minister responsible for official languages. He, along with the Ottawa Mayor, Mark Sutcliffe, who CPAC viewers and listeners will know well, as he did have a past history as a broadcaster here on the channel, but he is amongst the welcoming party there at Lansdowne Park. Let's now watch as the King and the Queen make their way through the crowds. And there you have right now the scene at Lansdowne Park. This is not that far from Parliament Hill, about a 10-15-minute drive just south of Parliament Hill. The King and Queen doing a royal walkabout, which, Bonnie, has historical ties to this country because it was, 1939? The royal visit of King George, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. That was
wasn't
the very
at
first...
that one, Mike.
No, I know you were not. But we all studied in history. That's why I raised it up. But that was when I think the very first walkabout happened. It surprised members of the British media at the moment, at the time.
I think they just probably started to feel we have to get closer to people. So how are we going to do this? We're going to do walkabouts. So. And now we all do them. Politically, we call them walkabouts as well.
So here you have the tradition that began here in Canada, although I think the walkabout term is borrowed from Australia.
Yes.
And as you see there, behind the King and the Queen is the Prime Minister and his wife, Diana Fox-Carney, as they too are greeting the crowds. I want to get a quick measure of people's thoughts, though, because I think when one plans something like this, I never have, but I'm supposing that one of the great insecurities is who will show up, how many people will show up, because when it is hundreds, as we see right now, a great success for the monarchy. If it is not, then it becomes a bit of an embarrassment. What do you make of the crowds that we're seeing here, Laurie?
Well, I mean, I agree with you. This is the type of thing, it's not an RSVP event. You don't know if there's going to be, throngs of people, or if you're going to have not so many, or if you're going to have a big issue with respect to people protesting.
Sorry, I apologize. Let's listen to the King if we can a bit.
Big order from me. This is amazing. Thank you so much. I know it's. We're going to come back.
Okay, so obviously the Prime Minister is happy with the crowds that he's seeing here.
That was your question.
Yeah, but you were saying that, about this is not an RSVP event, and yet this is exactly what an organizer presumably is hoping for.
Oh yeah, this is a very full, enthusiastic, very positive, seems to be very genuinely happy crowd. They're being so well received. You can hear people say, we love you, and then all ages. You could see some veterans saluting the King, beautiful moment, honestly. And I could look at the people, and it's just a lovely day in Ottawa as well. It couldn't have gotten better, I don't think, in terms of just factors you can't control, like rain. It's a good day.
Yeah, it's a good day. Although, Bonnie, how important is this for the monarch? As we noted, this has not been an easy time for him. He's been having to undergo cancer therapy, as well as his daughter-in-law in Catherine, the Princess of Wales. But how does he react to moments like this? Because he seems very happy and, quite frankly, energized by the crowds.
Well, it would make him feel good, because you never, to what Laurie was saying, you never know when you arrive. And there's been lots of issues with Canada. They know that we're constantly debating whether we need them or not. Should we get rid of the monarchy? Will William be king? Will it be better? It's always that. So there's always a sense of relief when you arrive that the crowds are good and friendly and welcoming. And you have a very enthusiastic Prime Minister walking behind you, who's even more excited, I think, than the King. But it's important, these types of occasions, that they are as glorious as this is looking right now.
Mm-hmm. And you were saying non-threatening, Catherine.
Exactly, which is important. Alors jusqu'ici, évidemment, il faut voir comment le reste de la visite
We'll have
va
to see
se
how the
dérouler.
rest of the visit will go, but up to now, Mark Carney must be saying, well, I've won my bet, this is mission accomplished. To now, as you've said, the crowd is enthusiastic, excited, we don't feel much tension. This is the image of Canada, no tension. Security, of course, you see the security guards, but it's not excessive, it's not overbearing. It doesn't give you the impression that you have in the US and elsewhere in the world, where security is so omnipresent, it becomes overbearing. We don't feel that here. We can see the King and the Queen walking about, shaking hands, talking to people. This isn't something that you would see on a daily basis elsewhere or even here. So I think it's significant. I think this is the first time that Canadians have seen the King up close. We know Charles as a prince, but as a monarch, we had no idea what he was like.
Since his coronation.
Bonnie
mentioned this. He hadn't come as monarch, and he was wondering when it would be the right time to come. What would be the right moment? Now this is very informal. It'll be more formal tomorrow because we're reading the throne speech. But I think that King Charles wants to show an image that he's an accessible person. I understand my role, but I'm here as a spokesperson for people. I represent ordinary people. He doesn't seem to be removed from people as other monarchs have been, but was nothing like the crowds we had when Diana came. That was hysteria. But Canadians are showing their respect to the monarch this time, I think. There's a lot of people. Could there have been more? I think that the city authorities have frightened people by saying that the streets would be closed.
See if we can hear a little bit of the King as he gathers with the people. Let's take a listen.
We will make sure that they.
And how Canadian was that in front of Canadian maple syrup as he makes his way to the hockey? And you know, and to your point, Catherine, about security and the differences, it being in Canada, because here you have a head of state, a monarch, and there were two options here for officials. They could have chosen to put this indoors at either the Aberdeen Pavilion there at Lansdowne Park, where they normally have a farmer's market, or at the Horticultural Pavilion. So they could have made this indoors for security's sakes, but they haven't. And to picking up on your point, Geneviève, really showing an affinity for the Canadian people, and of course that's always been the parlance, correct me if I'm wrong here, Bonnie, of Buckingham Palace. You know, this is a tour because he's not a visitor to Canada. This is one of his realms. Mm-hmm. And so to be with the people of Canada from the viewpoint of Buckingham Palace is for Charles to be at home with the people he represents on the throne.
Yeah. And I mean, these are really close, open events. Like you know, he's really kind of in the center of it and exposed as is she, and you do see them do this. But this is really quite. He's just right there for a lot of people to almost reach out and touch him, which is. I also see he's got his Order of Canada on his lapel as well. But. And, you know, just being able to do this where, again, he's not surrounded by security. Stepping out there, you know, into that center by himself is actually a bit of a security risk, but, you know, he's doing it. So.
And being able to, as a result, take part in the puck drop that we just saw there. Chris Phillips there, former Ottawa senator, well known for his philanthropic efforts and community building efforts, as he drops the ball there for the young people to play a bit of street hockey.
And they're kind of moving it along, I find, nicely. Mm-hmm. It's at a nice pace where I assume they want to sort of stick, you know. Okay, so, yeah.
Clearly they're enjoying themselves.
The last time they were here, too, he was a prince then, he wasn't king yet, but they were right down in the market, like right down with the people.
With the people.
It seems to be that's his preference. He wants to go and meet people and talk and have spontaneous conversations and be part of what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think as he gets older, it gets more and more important, you know, to do that. And I mean, it's pretty ironic when you look at the Prime Minister who at Christmas time was just being a normal Canadian doing his job, and 4 months later, and he's Prime Minister of Canada, and he's got the King of England.
Absolutely. Although, you know, I will say, and this is going back to the coronation, Bonnie, there was a question of what would the Carolinian era look like under Charles III. And in many ways, this seems to be a hallmark. It carries what his mother was building on, but a hallmark of trying to be closer to the people and not as far removed, a more intimate, smaller royal family, trying to be more efficient for the people who they want to represent.
Yes, and it is smaller. Some of it not by design, with one son. But yeah, they've talked about doing that for a long time, and I think the Queen struggled with doing some of it. So, kind of over to you, Charles. When you become king, you can start to streamline a little bit. So it's still a bit messy about who actually is a working royal. Like some days,
Complicated by health challenges as well
yeah.
right now.
And then when I think of others like Princess Beatrice and Eugenie, one day they are, the next day they aren't. So I think they're still trying to figure out how all that should work, because William and the king can't do it all. They're kind of small at this point, so they've got to get around a bit more, and they've both had health challenges in both families. So, the last year and a half have not been what they were expecting it to be.
No, and fair enough. And although, again, just underlines the amount of effort it has taken for Buckingham Palace to organize this, and as you said, Bonnie, driven by the fact that King Charles wanted to be here in this moment as he was looking for an opportunity.
And frankly, the country needs a bit of a visit from a king right now with everything. I think it's good, and I think it's healthy. For us, we'll figure it out, after the next day or so. But I think these trips they're important for sovereignty and for national identity.
Well, it certainly is. It's the start of a new parliament. Of course, that is why the throne speech is read. But really, when you consider the past months since the U.S. election, all that has happened in the United States, all that has happened with the former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, the drama within the Liberal Party, a parliament that was at a standstill over a point of privilege, where very little was actually accomplished for many months until Parliament went into proroguement, a Liberal leadership, a federal election. So much that has happened that, funnily enough, as large as a king's visit is, it is actually a moment to breathe, if you will, considering the speed at which politics has been in this country, Geneviève.
And only for a small period of time, parce que demain c'est le discours du trône, et demain on relance la machine.
Throne speech, and that's when governments start working again. So this is a bit of a break, a small pause. Everyone's all smiles, looking forward to what they're going to eat. Well, it's important to look at this from a psychological point of view. I'm not a psychologist, but let's look at this from that point of view. Look what's happening with the Trump administration. It's a country that's been deeply, deeply wounded by the Trump administration, our friends, our allies, and a country that we used to admire for the relationship with the rest of the world. All that's gone. And I think every time where we can take a break, or we can have happier, more joyful times, the better it is. It's good for people. It's good for Canadians. You can criticize, of course, and that's fine. That's part of democracy. But the fact remains is that today is a joyous occasion. It's down to earth. Everyone looks in a good mood, happy. How can you be against that?
Seulement une petite pause. I'll take it. Regardless, I will take it. Although, I will say that as they're now inside, I believe, the horticultural building at Lansdowne Park, let's take a listen as to what is being expressed, because a quieter venue, so perhaps we'll have a greater chance of hearing what the King and the Queen have to say to the people there. They're gathered to say hello. Let's take a listen as we continue special coverage here on CPAC.
sure they're very popular.
So this is Christina from Engineering, which is a college consortium of
And you're watching special coverage here on CPAC as we cover the beginning of the King and Queen's visit to Ottawa. King Charles, King of Canada, here to read the throne speech tomorrow. And I'm going to say, and I'm going to point this out, that I'm apparently surrounded by far greater gastronomes than I, because as the King was making his way through the vendors, Catherine, you and Geneviève, you noted someone, of course, what do I know? Usually my orders are numbered, 1, 2, or 3, but you noticed someone in the crowd.
Pas besoin d'être un grand gastronome pour connaître Ricardo.
Well, you don't
qu'on a
have to
vu
love
apparaître.
food
Ricardo,
to
qui est
know
un chef
Ricardo.
très
Ricardo is a very well-known chef in Montreal and Quebec. He also has magazines, and we saw his organization at Table des Chefs, but he also publishes magazines outside Quebec. In Toronto, he's a star of Quebec cuisine, and he was there. Now, we've seen, we had the same reaction, Geneviève and I, when we recognized who it was. And I have to say that he's well dressed today, well turned out. Ricardo is very involved in charity organizations as well. Les Écoles Laboratoires, for example, that's a Quebec initiative. Now, he's the type of figure that the King will be meeting today. And the King really likes community organizations. So La Table des Chefs will speak to him, and he'll be speaking to others today as well. You said that you don't like cooking, Michael, but you just look when you're at the cash of any supermarket and you'll see Ricardo's magazine. Let's listen in.
You know, you try your best to catch the microphone of the King, but we'll continue the efforts here. Although I will say this is the Philistine that you have with you, as Catherine and Geneviève were leaning over going, oh, that's Ricardo. I'm sitting there going, oh, look at the cookies. So, so let's take a listen one more time.
So if you could actually reach in and press the power button on that scale here, can you reach and get all the power button? Perfect. And if you can read the scale, it's about to even out. And we're going to see how much lift we can generate with this. So if someone sees the number on the scale, we're about to see it go down, and that means that lift is increasing. So the fan is on. Yeah, exactly. And so you might recognize this fuselage here. It is modeled after a Lancaster. Yeah, and then we've got another one here, which is modeled after the Spitfire. And you can see you can play with different wings. And we're looking at how can the wing shape and the fuselage change your perception, right? Looking at that. Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. This shape was inspired by a bird, right? Looking at nature to see what we could learn. Exactly. Yeah. Thank you.
So that means we should get in with
13 guitar.
So as the King continues his tour of the pavilion, you'll notice that it began with some food and some chefs, as noted by my colleagues here at the desk. But also, the last conversation you heard was with Ingenium, which is Canada's Museums of Science and Innovation. So a bit of a demonstration. And now carrying on to see others who have, it looks like more of a first aid organization here with the Red Cross on their lapels. Let's take a listen to the exchange once again as the King continues his tour.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Exactly. It's indigenous knowledge. Yeah, controlled burns. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, the fire breaks. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. You're an expert in this.
You know, Bonnie, I'm going to preface this by saying if I jump in, it's going to be because we're going to try to hear from the King again. But talk to us about the planning of these types of events, because obviously we're seeing people from all walks of life, but also different industries, different community groups. What goes into deciding who gets to be involved in these types of walkabouts?
Those are interesting meetings that you have with your other colleagues, but the Royals tend to have theme their tours a little bit about what they would like it to be, and this one has a lot to do with meeting as many Canadians with diversity and understanding historical background. So you sit in your meetings with members of the palace. You would talk back and forth about what our advice would be for the King to meet or to come and see, and what they think they would like to do. Like, it is very much a back and forth, and I'm sure to some extent the PCO and government people are quite relaxed at this point, because so far they've had a very good outing, so things are rolling along for them. And so I know what those moments feel like when you start counting your way to get through the events to make sure everything is good. But there's a lot of thought. The issues management comes into it as well, like politically, what should he be doing? Is there a message that we want to portray, on a public policy issue? What are the interests that we know that the Queen would like? What is something that we think we might direct towards her specifically? So you have those sort of full discussions, and you determine. We would usually send a draft of what we think it would look like, and they would take a look at it, and it goes back and forth a little bit.
Back and forth, and in this case, warp speed, because they only had about 3 or 4 weeks to organize this. As Lori nods her head enthusiastically to that, what have you heard about the discussions back and forth on this?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's such a short period of time. I mean, clearly a short period of time to plan, and also such a short period of time that he's here. And a good chunk of that time is soaked up by the speech from the throne. And so you don't have that much time to work with in terms of who's going to get access to the King, how are they going to spend their time. And so, yeah, I mean, it's such a short period of time to work with.
And he has to be rested as well,
yes,
right, for the speech tomorrow, with health issues, and he's a little bit older, and the speech can be long.
Yes.
So he's got to be well prepped and comfortable with the actual reading of it. So.
Il y a quelque chose de très intéressant, c'est à quel point les images parlent. Quand on fait de la télé
The
depuis
pictures
longtemps,
speak for themselves. And really, a picture, an image is worth 1,000 words. We're seeing the Prime Minister of Canada, who's our Prime Minister, who has the power, who's walking behind King Charles, and and we see King Charles and Queen Camilla. They're at the center of the event today. The Prime Minister is in the shadows. And that's interesting for people who live in republics, who are used to seeing the President being at the heart of all the action. This isn't the case today. Not today, at least. Not for this type of event. And that forces the Prime Minister to be humble. And I think that's typically Canadian. Now we're getting into psychology again. But indulge me. It forces the Prime Minister to be humble. It forces the Prime Minister, when he wishes to call an election, to get permission from the royal representative. All that's symbolic. The Prime Minister does have the power. However, the fact remains that there's a higher power. There's always someone higher than him who could theoretically say, no, I don't give you permission. So it's completely different from a republic. And like it or not, this is who we are.
I don't know if you want to pick up on that, Geneviève.
I like the idea that the Prime Minister is not at the heart of the action. He's accountable to the institution, is accountable to the king. Some people say that Canada should have a ceremonial president, but that's not what we have. We have democracy, and democracy is really at the heart of who we are.
In many ways, that's the argument that monarchists make for the crown in this country, because the crown represents continuity. The crown does not ebb and flow the way, for example, the Reagan era versus the Clinton era versus the Obama era and the Trump era. All of those come to define a republic, but when it comes to the crown, we have had governments come and go, but certainly the longevity of the Queen before King Charles points to essentially you speak of this humility of following the crown, but it is because the crown supersedes all in this country, and so arguably carries on a through line of what it means to be Canadian and to have a Canadian democracy that is very distinct from, as you say, the Republican system or republic system that we see in the United States. Bonnie, did you want to say anything to that?
And I actually think a lot of young people don't necessarily understand their relationship at all with the crown, or enough, and or how our own parliamentary system works. So I think we as a country have a lot more to do in educating our own Canadian history. But I do believe that Donald Trump has erupted something within this country that's made us decide that we need to look after our own identity. And in some ways, he's actually been helpful to us. And so I think that, we should, we have to find a way as we move forward to secure ourselves and secure our borders and secure our country and our national identity. And I think this trip is helping with that, or it should.
Well, and as you said, also a moment for every Canadian, politicians and political leaders included, to take this moment to perhaps elevate from where we have been prior and to how partisan and bickering it has been to perhaps...
It won't last, but we can try. So, I mean, they'll get back into the House, and, because it is actually time for the government to get back to work.
Yes, yes.
This has been 5 months since the House sat, so... and there are things to do and things to take care of, and also I'm hoping that there is a sense of people really caring about being Canadian and protecting us. I hope we're actually starting to see that, and I'll be watching a lot of the polls in the coming weeks now that all this has happened to see if there is an uptake now in how Canadians are starting to feel. And are they going to fight for their country in a way that they would never have thought of before? And understanding what King Charles is. Because I think there is a lack of that. It's a lot like, I know this is not defunding the CBC. What does that mean? It's part of our national identity as well. So we have to really think through a lot of these institutions that have made us what we are today. And yeah.
Checks and balances. The next test will be the 1st of July, I think, Canada Day. Will it be different from past years? Will the feeling of patriotism shine through? I think that will give us a good indication of just how much Canadians have changed their perception and how they've increased their interest for the country and have become more patriotic. That's not far away. I think the 1st of July celebrations will be a good indication to see if things have changed.
Because, of course, Canada Day is a non-partisan event, and one would hope that people celebrate the country regardless of political stripe. And I do wonder whether or not Bonnie talks about having to accomplish things quickly. Well, we have, I believe that the last day of sitting is going to be June 20. And Mark Carney has talked a lot about moving things at a speed that we have not seen before. We're going to get the first indication of that tomorrow in the throne speech to see what priorities are set out by the government. The King reads the speech. It is written by the government. We'll have to see what the priorities are, and also how effective it can be in the first, 4 weeks between now and when Parliament's meant to rise. conveniently right before Canada Day, as you say. So it'll be interesting to see how all these are connected and how they interact when we actually get to July the 1st, Geneviève.
Well, and the Prime Minister laid out his mandate in one mandate letter for every MP, which, you know, that's a difference. And also some of the points were like one line of the 7 priorities, not a preamble and paragraphs that most people never read or don't even know what it means. And so I think you're seeing a bit of a change there about just let's sharpen the pencils a bit and make it, let's lay out priorities that the average person will actually understand and be comfortable with. So I'm hopeful in that sense that we're, you know, leading ourselves into a better situation. Mm-hmm. Don't know if that will happen, but he's streamlining things in a more comprehensive way for most people.
Mm-hmm. You know, I do want to do a bit of a follow-up because, you know, we know again that the throne speech is composed not by Buckingham Palace but composed by the Prime Minister's office. Will there be an opportunity, though, Bonnie, for the King to interject something to perhaps, I don't know whether it's a symbolic nod to Canadian nationalism or a rallying call for nationalism? Do you think there's an opportunity for that at all, or will it be around that's the speech itself?
It would be up to him personally if he decides to do that. I mean, the royals tend to, you know, move around political issues and not engage fully. They don't step into them usually. The Queen never did. She was a champion of how to be a leader without getting messy. So the King, you know, we'll see if he says something that tips in his toe a little bit into the water to say, you know, I think he will praise Canada and may speak to who we are as a country independent, mm-hmm. you know, and part of the global economy and part of global opportunities for working with other allies and stepping away from the U.S., things like that. Is he gonna raise the flag? I don't know. You know, that's be a little risky for him to do, but.
We will watch. As we see now, the Prime Minister getting into his car, the motorcade, getting ready to leave Lansdowne Park. And from here, they will go to Rideau Hall, the residence of the Governor General, also the residence of the King and the Monarch when in Canada. So that is now the scene in Rideau Hall. You see Rideau Hall in the background, the grounds of Rideau Hall there in the foreground. As people get ready, getting word, I presume, that the motorcade is getting ready to leave Lansdowne Park. Not much of a drive, especially if they can clear the way around certain streets in downtown Ottawa. Could be there in about 15 minutes or so. We will, of course, see, but you can see there the King in the back seat as the motorcade gets ready to go. A crack of the window open, a testament just how nice the weather actually is in Ottawa today. And with that, let's just watch the scene as the King leaves Lansdowne Park. And one more look at beautiful Lansdowne Park in the middle of Ottawa, if you will. About a 20-minute drive, 20-minute drive to Rideau Hall. Again, the Governor General's residence and the residence of the King while in this country. And that is where the next set of events will take place. You see there Rideau Hall now, the grounds of Rideau Hall. And once Andrew Thompson, who has courageously, heroically made his way from the airport, now running over to Rideau Hall, will give us a bit of the snapshot of what's happening there on the grounds. But you know, Lori, I'm wondering for organizers just how happy they must be, because the bulk of the unpredictability, I would argue, is done. It was at the airport where there were crowds to greet the King and the Queen. It was certainly at Lansdowne Park, but now we move into more officialdom. Rideau Hall today. Tomorrow there will be the Landau ride down Wellington Street to the Senate. That will be at around 10 a.m. Eastern Time for those in Ottawa who might want to see it live in action. But beyond those, you know, that Landau ride, the public events, the unpredictability of who will show up, how many people show up, that has now passed. Am I right?
For the most part, yeah, exactly. They're making their way now. They're in the motorcade. They're going to come up to Rideau Hall. And so you don't have the same amount of kind of unpredictability and lack of control around who might be there. And even things like the weather. Like, let's be honest, we're in Ottawa here. It hasn't been all that sweet the past few days, but for the royal visit, it seems to have kind of perked right up. And so they don't have to worry about things like that. It's supposed to be beautiful again tomorrow. And so, yeah, I mean, like at this point, they're kind of getting towards that back end of the day. And this has been, from their perspective, certainly a long day. They would have, you know, when they get over here, different time zone, obviously, and so they started much earlier than than we did, and so yeah, they're getting kind of towards the back end of their program.
Yeah, absolutely, and you know, although Bonnie, I'll bring you in because you had the breaking news, if you will, that their schedule has just been expanded, because we know that Indigenous leadership in this country were hoping they would get some time with the King and the Queen. Again, that direct relationship of treaty that we addressed earlier on. Right. And it looks like that's going to be happening.
It's going to happen, I assume, at Government House when they get back, because the Prime Minister will be there and the Governor General. They may even be in those meetings, I have no idea. But the leadership of, I think there's 3 or 4 that will be going to Government House to have even half an hour or so with the King. And maybe sometimes with staff, you're not always sure politically where you should put things, and he himself may have made the decision that, yes, I would like to do that. Or they asked him in the crowd when he arrived, we've been trying to see you. That happens a lot too, but we can't get a meeting. You never know how those things come about.
Well, and certainly at the Ottawa airport, or at least Hangar 11, the reception center, we saw Indigenous leadership there. We saw Cindy Woodhouse-Sneepanak of the AFN, Natan Obed of the ITK, as well as the Métis Federation. They were there, so perhaps it was that simple, although we do know that they have been hoping to get a meeting with the King, because as the focus in this country has been about increasing economic activity and investment, they are concerned about natural resource and what that will actually mean for consultation, or whether or not consultation will still exist. But again, it underlines, Geneviève, have this nation-to-nation relationship with Indigenous communities in this country and the Crown.
Oui, et c'est un concept qui est très important.
Well, it's a concept that's very important. It's not from government to government. It's nation to nation, nation to the Crown. But you shouldn't forget that it's not King Charles that'll have the last word in this. He can say what he wants to say, but it's the Prime Minister who decides. But I think the focus of attention is important. These meetings have taken place, even if they're symbolic, that's important. And then of course, the Aboriginals will have to deal with the government and their Prime Minister, but it's still in nation to nation. That's the image that we're trying to project here. And then, do you think that Prince Charles or the King Charles is healthy enough to meet them? I'm sure that was all decided at the last minute, but it's a symbolic meeting, I think, and I think it sends a very positive image for Aboriginal communities.
But of course, it also means that their concerns, the concerns of Indigenous leadership, remain front and center, that it's not ignored and pushed to the sidelines as historically it has been.
It's a huge issue for us as a country and as a government. So it has, he actually should meet with them, right? Like, I mean, it's just part of the way that it should move forward.
So that will be one of the meetings that we'll be watching for. He'll also be meeting with the Governor General, Mary Simon. In fact, there will also be a very interesting moment when this all comes together, because there will be a vice-regal family photo, if you will, because the vice-regals from across the country, the lieutenant governors, as well as the commissioners from the territories, they're all here along with the Governor General, and they will actually sit down with the King, underlining the fact that this is Charles's first visit to this country since becoming king. So a key moment to be watching there.
Well, yes, and you know, we have to remember, as Prince of Wales, he actually professionalized the role of being Prince of Wales. He wasn't flitting around going to parties and, you know, on yachts and big vacations. He was actually running a very successful farm, the Duchy of Cornwall, and he got into organic farming. He cares about the environment. So he's engaged as a business person. So I think he understands a lot better. First of all, he was Prince of Wales for a long time, but still, he didn't waste it. He made it into something. So he understands meetings and the necessities to speak with certain groups and certain people. And I think that comes from his own training in business to actually function and operate as a successful, you know, business person and leader. So I think that's why things like this probably happen.
Sorry,
non, j'allais dire, c'est intéressant aussi ces
rencontres éventuelles entre les meeting. I think it's interesting that there's a meeting between the First Nations and the King and Queen, because I think it really illustrates the difficulty that there is between the Canadian government and First Nations in terms of the relationship, as well as with the provinces and territories, because the First Nations live in those provinces, so they have a relationship with those governments, which are sometimes conflictual. So very often they turn to the government in Ottawa, and sometimes that relationship's difficult as well. So it's another way, I think, for them to express their issues. We've seen over the past few years that the relationship has not always been easy with the other levels of government in Canada.
In Queen Elizabeth's time, when we heard from Indigenous leadership in this country, that there was great loyalty to the Crown, great affinity for the Queen, where Canadians of other stripes may be debating the role of the monarchy. For the Indigenous community, there was a clear relationship that they wanted to protect, Laurie.
Oh, absolutely. As we were saying earlier, the nation-to-nation relationship and the endurance of the sovereign, and the fact that this is a non-political person, as governments change hands, they will have very different ideas about how to manage the relationship with Indigenous people. And so during that time, as we see that kind of turmoil and the lack of predictability that can happen at the political level, there is always that constant in the sovereign. And so, especially when we're talking about things like, you know, the negotiation of Indigenous rights, what treaty rights mean, that's an incredibly important relationship. And so, not surprised to see that this meeting is going to happen.
Et c'est un peu ironique aussi, il faut le mentionner quand même, à quel point cette relation-là changeait avec le temps.
This relationship has changed over time. The British Crown represents the British Empire, which was colonialist and did colonize Aboriginal peoples here. So the relationship has completely changed over time. There's been a sea change. It's changed in a spectacular fashion, and it's very, very different today.
Also, and this picks up on what you were talking about, Bonnie. You know, Prince Charles did not waste his time as King Charles did not waste his time as Prince of Wales, because he also began the Prince's Trust, which brought the monarchy and the institution that much closer to diverse communities, young people involved in the arts, people that were, quite frankly, economically suffering and not part of the largesse that exists in society for other people, Bonnie.
Well, and the Commonwealth is very successful as well in its care for the programs and things that they've built around the world, and a lot of people don't really have much knowledge of that either. Commonwealth was very important to the Queen, and now she passed it on to her son before she died, that he would become head of the Commonwealth and to look after it. And he would have the same beliefs that that there's things that you have to get, you have to dig deep and get organized. And so he's been doing that for a very long time. And the relationship with Indigenous groups has been as far back as Queen Victoria, when she first started to sign treaties here. So the loyalty has been there for a very long time. And he does, one thing they do really well, I find that the royal family, is they really understand their history and the history of the Commonwealth countries. They are actually tutored in it, and they spend time understanding it, and so it's important. And you often see it'll either be William or Kate or Prince Edward and Sophie starting now to visit the other realms as they spread it down to the young people.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that, they also are navigating difficult waters, because if Canada, from time to time, has a discussion as to what the role of the monarchy actually is in this country. We know other countries the Commonwealth has as well. And I'm thinking, Bonnie, to that Caribbean tour that William and Catherine took part in. It was probably about 2-3 years ago at this point. Not an easy tour for them, because they were criticized for the historical wrongs that it took place in the colonial times.
Right? They're looking for some apologies, or a form of an apology from the UK as well as from the royal family on slavery, and racism. And also, I think for William and Kate on that tour, I can't remember which country, but they had to ride on the back of a truck in one of the like a Landau, but it was on a truck, and you could actually tell that both of them were uncomfortable, because it was just too old royal. It was just too, it was the wrong thing to be doing in that country at that moment. So I think they're starting to get a lot smarter about how much pomp and pageantry do we continue with? Like, where is it appropriate, and where do we need to scale it back?
And it's interesting, and this is just a quick tangential, because, and I forget where I was reading this over the weekend, but about William already putting his mind to what his monarchy will look like, because much more emphasis on getting things done, getting your hands dirty, and improving things, rather than just being a symbol amongst the fray of people trying to get things going along. So
he knows it's going to be him, right? In terms of succession planning, there's no surprises, unless something happens to William before his turn comes. But yes, and he should be planning, and I've heard all of that as well. There's a lot of planning going on.
But you know it better than I. I'm just quoting an article I read.
No, but of course they're planning.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. As we take a look right now at the motorcade at Rideau Hall, as you can see now arriving to the residence of the Governor General and the King's residence while in this country. And let's just take a listen right now as he's being greeted there by the Governor General to the left of the foreground of your screen, and her partner arriving at Rideau Hall. Let's take a listen.
I'd say we Welcome home, Sean.
Hey, buddy, how's it going? Good.
And there you have the king taking part in a tree planting ceremony, something that's become a bit of a Canadian tradition here, symbolizing friendship and cooperation between nations. The plantings at Rideau Hall by members of the royal family and heads of state and other dignitaries, a tradition dating back to the early 1900s. And as you can see, Prince Charles using the shovel, King Charles, excuse me, using the shovel to put some dirt onto the tree, and then Queen Camilla watering the tree itself. This is, in fact, the 5th tree planted at Rideau Hall by His Majesty, the 2nd planted by their Majesties together. Let's just take in the scene as they stand there for photos in front of the tree.
He's going wherever he wants to go. We need to keep it so we can get that. Yeah, I know.
Sarah, what's our next move?
And as you can see, an enthusiastic crowd also gathered around Rideau Hall. And if that surprises people who've not been here in Ottawa, that is because while Rideau Hall is the official residence of the Governor General, there are also portions of Rideau Hall that are open to the public. That includes the grounds for most of the day. And as you can see, the Canadian public invited to be a part of this ceremony as King Charles makes his way to the building, Rideau Hall itself, but on the grounds right now, greeting people in another walkabout, as enthusiastic, despite the fact that there is a little bit of drizzle, which is why we saw Queen Camilla earlier use a bit of an umbrella as she got out of the car, still holding it, as she too shakes the hands of the people that have gathered there in Rockcliffe Park. And look, even a turkey wants to get in on the action. I guess just thankful not to be part of the supper this evening as he's walking around. Not yet.
Your Majesty. Jack, she wants some water. It's coffee. It's from me. Yeah. We go back where we and then we'll need to go round to back home. So this way. Okay. Take care of my live camera, don't worry.
Okay, no, but we need to go either one side or the other.
I know it. No, I'm in the middle of it.
back.
form of that, mate. That's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. Come on. Put the cap for me to the shop, sir. Right the cap. Okay, we're going to put the cap for the shop. Can you see?
I'm the director.
Pardon?
Yes, so she sat and said it.
Yeah, we just want to give a shout out to speeds here.
I met your parents in Expo 67.
Ouais, c'est bon, on attend. Sammy said. Ouais, ouais, on s'est moving. Thank you. Vraiment, merci. Just a second, I just want to get this. Yeah.
Delegation off the main path.
I know, I mean that. It's much better that way so everyone gets what they want.
Just a little bit more. There you go. Okay, back up, back up, back up. Next camera over here will pick it up.
And I see you all in a minute.
You will.
I'm so sorry we've been put behind a rope.
Okay, nice to meet you again.
I see. I didn't see you so soon.
Yeah.
We've just started.
Wonderful.
We've just started.
I'm from Saskatchewan. I met you at Buckingham Palace.
How are you guys? Honorable. Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
How are you? Billy, big. Hello, baby.
Back.
I'm out of place.
Back down, down.
You are watching CPAC as we bring you special coverage of the King's arrival to Canada ahead of tomorrow's throne speech, which King Charles will be reading. And two quick notes here. You'll notice from time to time the video is breaking up, and that's because the weather has changed a bit from the sunny skies to only partially sunny skies. Some rain is falling down, and that is causing some interruption with our signal feed, so bear with us as we go through it. And you will see there the King and the Queen, or just previously, and they continue to essentially spend some time with this group of people. And if you follow vice-regals closely across this country, that is because those are the lieutenants governors of Canada from the different provinces there to greet the monarch who they represent in their respective homes. And later on we will see the group of them take part in a vice-regal family photo, if you will. But that is why the King and Queen is spending a little bit more time with this group than they were previously, although they did spend a lot of time walking through and shaking hands of the people that have been standing through good and bad weather to get their chance to see them at Rideau Hall. And Rideau Hall, you see there in the background of the shot, the grounds of Rideau Hall is the foreground where all of this is taking place as they make their way into the building itself, where the King and Queen will stay this evening. This is their residence while in Canada, and where they will also have their meetings, separate meetings with the Governor General, followed by a meeting with the Prime Minister, and we believe at this moment in time Indigenous leadership as well as Indigenous leaders are hoping to have a private audience with the King. So as King Charles and Camilla continue with their receiving line and continue to make their way to Rideau Hall, let's go back to the grounds and take a listen to what is happening.
I'm from British Columbia. British Columbia, nice to see you. That's a long way to go. You both British?
Nova Scotia.
Nova Scotia.
Oh, okay. Good to see you again. I did your 14 visit.
Oh, you did. You've never been the same since.
No, for the better.
Your Majesty, Manitoba.
My family's right there.
Oh, right.
They'd love to meet you.
So huge, Canada.
My family. Congratulations. It's wonderful. My grandchildren. Wow. These are the middle ones. That's Christopher. Brian. And George. Special day. My granddaughter.
Yeah, there's a few. 12? Yeah. Great.
You're watching CPAC as we continue coverage here of the King and Queen's arrival at Rideau Hall. And you know, Bonnie, I'm going to bring you into the conversation right now because you noted the special relationship between the monarchy and Canada. And I think there's an argument to be made that's even more so with the King, because this is King Charles's first visit as monarch, but this is his 20th visit overall as a member of the royal family.
Yeah, he's been here a lot, and he's spent a fair amount of time here over his, I guess, the last 40 years, 35 or 40 years. But, I mean, in many ways, what's not to love when you come to Canada, right? He's been well treated, good hospitality, but he, I think they've always been impressed with the vastness of Canada, like just how big it is and how parts of the northern parts of Canada are, you know, not overly populated. So in that sense, we're very different from the US, and we're very different from Europe. You know, we have space and we have beautiful parks and trees, as other places do, but Canada is just different in that way. And everyone thinks we're nice. They think we're nice. But, you know, I think he's...
Let's not disappoint them.
Yeah, not now. Yeah, I think it's not been like a problematic country within the Commonwealth or within the realms. We've had our issues and we've had our discussions about what to do with the monarchy, but it's not been horribly confrontational. It's been a good relationship, and we know we were a favorite place for the Queen and for her mother as well. So, and they are wilderness people. They like to hunt. They like to fish. They like, they're outdoorsy. They like horses. So, Canada, we offer a lot of that, and so I think it was easy for them to they've always talked about how much they love the geography of Canada and the people that are different. Every province and territory that you go to, there's something a little bit different about every one of us.
Different and yet united in the belief of this country, absolutely. And I know that there's been less of a focus on attire. In particular with Catherine, the Princess of Wales, but certainly as well with Camilla, Queen Camilla. Although I want to note the fact, because we have not yet noted it on air, that she is wearing a very special brooch, Bonnie.
Yes, I believe it's the brooch that we, Canada, gave to the Queen Mother. So that brooch has probably had various trips here, but because Queen Elizabeth wore it as well. So that brooch is probably 40 years old, somewhere around there. That was done, and it's a beauty. And it'll be interesting to see what kind of jewelry we see tomorrow. If there's and I don't know if she'll have a tiara, even a small one on tomorrow. Sometimes they do, just more like a headband. So that'll tell another tale. And what brooch, I don't know what robes, are they in, what kind of dress tomorrow, for the occasion.
And also the symbolism, because even before coming here, they given the challenge that Canada was having vis-a-vis the United States, they made the point of having subtle symbols like the planting of a maple tree, for example, and I believe it was at Highgrove at Sandringham, but planting of a maple tree, as well as Catherine choosing to wear red, for example, at one event to show solidarity. So those subtle points of symbolism.
Well, and I think Catherine had that brooch on the first time she came as well.
She did.
When she was the new, I think they were married. When
recently married.
And when she came, she had the brooch on as well. So.
Well, it looks at this point as if the King and the Queen have made their way into Rideau Hall, and standing by, taking all of this in, is our very own Andrew Thompson, who, as I said earlier, heroically made the trek despite all the traffic in the nation's capital from the airport to Rideau Hall. So, Andrew, walk us through the program at this point, because again, the King and the Queen have now made their way into Rideau Hall proper.
Right, the ceremonial outdoor phase is over, and now really we're going to have some events reflecting on the King's constitutional role as King of Canada, as the sovereign. Inside the Governor-General's residence, there's going to be two meetings. One is an audience with Governor-General Mary Simon, the King's representative here in Canada. That's going to be followed a few minutes later by an audience with Prime Minister Mark Carney. Now, cameras will not be allowed in, for the duration of those talks, as much as we might like to hear what's being said in those meetings. But those meetings we expect each to take between 20 and 25 minutes. The King and Queen Camilla will also sign what's called the Golden Book. This is a visitor's register here at Rideau Hall that comes with great significance, signed by many of the world dignitaries that have come here to the grounds of the Governor-General over the years. Then we're going to have some more constitutional business, and it involves Queen Camilla. She's going to be sworn in as a member of the King's Privy Council for Canada. It's a short ceremony, a short oath that she's going to be taking, and essentially what this will do, it will give her a formal constitutional role as an advisor to the King on Canadian issues. Now, usually when we talk about the Privy Council, it's because we're here at Rideau Hall for a cabinet swearing-in ceremony, and the Prime Minister and other members of cabinet, once they get those jobs, they're made members officially of the King's Privy Council. So that's going to be happening with Queen Camilla. Now, the King himself, while he was Prince of Wales, he was made a member of the Privy Council, for the Queen's Privy Council, and also the Duke of Edinburgh, the late Prince Philip. He was made a member of the Queen's Privy Council for Canada in the late 1950s, so Queen Camilla following in these footsteps. There's also going to be a photo, I should say, with the various provincial lieutenant governors that are here on the grounds of Rideau Hall. And then, Michael, that is it in terms of public events for the day as the King and Queen get ready for tomorrow's events, including the speech from the throne.
Absolutely. Andrew, thank you for that. CPAC's Andrew Thompson at Rideau Hall. And yes, of course, tomorrow's throne speech will be the centerpiece of this royal visit. The purpose of the visit by the King and the Queen, although also the symbolism of coming to Canada in face of the challenges Canada finds itself right now vis-a-vis the United States. But you know, Laurie, I'm going to ask you a little bit about the oath that Camilla will be taking. Taking an oath to be part of the Privy Council of Canada, why is that significant?
So typically, if you were a minister and you were sworn into the Privy Council, you are part of the active executive at the time. But then if you're no longer a minister, if you move on in your career, if the government is over, whatever, you retain that Privy Council acknowledgement, like that designation for life, unless something bad happens and they try to take it away from you. But let's not talk about that. For the most part, people stay Privy Councillors for life, and you're not an active advisor to the government anymore, but you retain that title. And so for the most part, most of the people who have that title are current or former ministers. And so it's actually quite a special thing to bring someone else into that kind of family, because I think of her special relationship with Canada, because it acknowledges that she's certainly a very important part of this as well. And so it just gives a recognition for her, I think, while she's here at a very important time. Yeah, that's for her.
Yeah, principal advisor to the King, more principal than others.
Exactly. I think she's principal advisor to the King all the time. But yeah, we give her a special role for that here.
Geneviève, what do you make of that?
Tout est encore dans les symboles et les images qu'on
it's
veut
all
projeter.
symbolic.
Oui, c'est pour
It's another image we're trying to project. It points to the importance of the ties between the Canadian government and the monarchy. Camilla won't be taking any decisions anytime soon. Won't be calling her to get her advice, but it represents the importance of their relationship with the monarchy. And we shouldn't forget that the monarch acts on the recommendation of the Prime Minister. There's that power structure. So that's how it works, really. I think, if you allow, we should talk about the relationship between Canada with the monarch and the relationship between Canada and the United Kingdom. That's very, very important. Canada has been an ally of the UK in 2 world wars, fought side by side with the British in France against the Germans at the time. And we talked about gifts earlier that have been given. Great Britain has given gifts to Canada to thank it for its participation in fighting against Germany in the 2 world wars. For example, planes, German planes. These aren't things that you talk about very often. First World War German planes that were sent to Quebec and Ontario. And these 2 places were chosen specifically because these are planes that have been well conserved. One of them's in a museum in the Eastern Townships in Knowlton. And this plane is there. You can visit it. It was shot down in the UK by the Allies, and the British sent those planes to Canada and to the regions, because the Eastern Townships of Quebec, which is very loyalist that defended the British crown, because the British gave people their land. So it's a history that's interlinked, not just because of the monarchy, but also because Canada and Great Britain also have a common history, at least in the 20th century, but also well beyond that, especially in that part of the 20th century, which was decisive.
Of this visit, the ties that bind when you talk about the King Charles, because again, head of state, King of Great Britain, Northern Ireland, but also underlined King of Canada in this case, Bonnie.
Well, and you know, Queen Elizabeth died in Scotland, and that gave the whole world another 10-day historic look at what that monarchy meant to us, or does mean to us. And I think it just reminded everyone of the United Kingdom and its role and where Canada sort of fits in that. And I sometimes think that she purposely died in Scotland so that she could have the pomp and pageantry that took place to get her to the United Kingdom. I mean, it was a pretty gracious, beautiful 10 days of television, of just watching, you know, this magnificence keep going. But yeah, the tides that bind, we have to be reminded often of who we are, and I think that's what's happening. And that's what we're seeing here today.
And at this point, the reminder is behind closed doors, because there are now going to be a couple of meetings. We'll see a few, as we call them, photo ops with the King and the Governor General, the King with the Prime Minister, the Vice Regal family photo, as I said.
But they can leave the crown at the door now. And they can go in and sit down as talk as people and as leaders of countries, and you know, and talk about issues and really start to have a much more comfortable, more comfortable environment to have conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. A very casual conversation, as you say. But you know, I keep using the term ties that bind, and I do have some video to share with you, because the beauty of CPAC is we have video from way back when. So we're going to play a bit of video here for you. This is from 1939. This was the Royal Tour, 1939. This was the first time a reigning monarch ever engaged in a royal tour. Excuse me, a royal tour of this country. And you see there a colorized version of this film, King George VI along with Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. And this was their arrival, and this was in Wolfe's Cove in Quebec. And just take a look at the crowds of people who showed up to greet the royal family. And this was no small tour of this country, because it began I believe it May 17th, and it went all the way to June 15th. So if you imagine nearly a month in Canada, and the King and the Queen made their way right across the country, taking trains to the west, going to Banff, going to Melville, Saskatchewan. A great little note there, Melville, Saskatchewan, this town of 4,000 people. When the King and Queen arrived, the population jumped to 60,000 people. That's how many people showed up, traveled to see the King and the Queen. And Bonnie, you were talking about the special relationship the Queen Mother had with Canada, evidenced by what we're seeing here right now. And by the way, Catherine, this is Montreal.
Yeah, right.
This is in the streets of Montreal.
Crowds. But the crowds are. But imagine being on a royal tour for a month.
Yeah, on a month, but it did not let up. Like if you look at the crowds of the people, and you know, listen to some interesting tidbits here, because you talk about coincidences or repetition of history, if you will, because at the time this tour came about because Prime Minister Mackenzie King wanted them to come to Canada, and he extended the invitation to King George. They had actually met during the coronation in 1937. As reports say, the two got on well, and so he invited the King and the Queen to come to this country to engage in this tour. And more than that, it was not about Canada vis-a-vis the United Kingdom. It was actually to reinforce this idea of a Canadian monarchy. So much so that, according to history, the Mackenzie King wanted this to be a very Canadian tour. He had a very big hand in organizing all the events here. He traveled with the King and Queen right across the country. Imagine a Prime Minister taking a month off these days to engage in a royal tour. And after this tour, bearing in mind this was 1939, the King and the Queen then went on to Washington, D.C., because this was near the start of the Second World War. And they had wanted the support, or the United Kingdom wanted the support of the United States. But Mackenzie King accompanied them to Washington and served as a royal advisor, so to make sure that the tour in North America not only had a Canadian aspect here in Canada, but also a Canadian aspect when it went on to the United States. Very interesting tidbits, Laurie, when you think about the current time frame and why this royal tour is taking place right now.
Yeah, it's interesting with the, I don't know if I want to say overlap, but or parallels. I don't want to put that fine a point on it, but just some symmetry there, you know, in terms of what's going on with Canada and the U.S. and with the UK and the U.S. and trying to manage that relationship. We know that Donald Trump is going to be watching tomorrow He is very interested in the monarchy. He loves the king. And yeah, I mean, I don't think the Prime Minister is going to be, I don't think there's going to be a little side trip to the US here, but at the same time, fascinating to think about a royal tour going on that long. And just, I mean, in terms of the size of the country, that's what it required to visit a few places, right? And having the time to actually to do all of that.
Well, and you know, there are echoes of this one royal visit ever since, because while here in Canada, this was also the essentially the unveiling of the War Memorial, the National Cenotaph, and it was originally created to mark the end of the War of All Wars, and you know, sadly, just a few months after the fact, the Second World War began. But I believe this is actually it, the War Memorial. So this was the unveiling of it by the King and the Queen at the time, and not just those echoes, but also echoes. For example, the Queen actually laid the foundation stone at the Supreme Court building, and she is credited in that time. Essentially, I'll read this. I'll read this in regard. They say that her speech at the Supreme Court has been regarded as perhaps the first and few feminist speeches a royal has given, because at the time she said the following: "It is fitting that a woman give this speech because the law has advanced the cause of women, not only in Canada but around the world." And that was in reference to the Persons case here in Canada. And so Geneviève, you're talking about the relationship between the United Kingdom and Canada, but also it shows the influence that Canada has globally, but also to the Commonwealth, when the Queen at the time is mentioning that a court ruling in this country had an impact elsewhere.
And it shows the relationship between the two countries. C'est frappant de voir à quel point, et ça revient à l'histoire, comment on oublie des fois
to see how we tend to forget our historic ties with the United Kingdom. Depends where you are. You'll have a different perspective, of course. But it's something that's not explained very well in various parts of the country. In the West, for example, the royal visit in the West was very important in 1939. But it's striking to see the recognition of women's role at the Supreme Court, and how we've used the monarchy to confirm or reaffirm our sovereignty. Are we really sovereign? Were we sovereign at the time? Because we were a former colony at the time. We're trying to state our independence, but the monarchy has played an important role. I don't know if we would say that we were subordinate to the monarchy and the British Crown. Not even then. But within Canada, of course, there's a debate that's going on about this in Quebec and among Aboriginal communities. But it's strange to see Mr. Carney reaffirming Canadian sovereignty by inviting the monarch of Canada, the King of Canada, but also the British King as well. There are subtleties that Canadians understand that people from outside Canada wouldn't necessarily grasp. Because we teach our kids about the monarchy, and first of all, the kids wonder why we have a king. And Canadians understand why we have a monarchy because of our history. We shouldn't lose sight of the fact that this was just the start of TV. People were just starting to have TVs at home in the 40s and 50s in black and white. And as you've said, these images have been colorized after the fact. It's fascinating. For the first time in our history, a king and a queen were in the public eye. And many images were recorded of that visit to Canada. And it was really the first time in the history of the world that this had been done. So when you think about it, it was a minor revolution. And this is undoubtedly what explains the crowds that we see. First of all, people were curious to see the King and Queen, perhaps more interested than now. We don't see crowds of this size now. But it was the only opportunity for them to see the King and Queen up close. It would perhaps be the only time in many people's lives that they would see the King and Queen. There was no TV at the time. That came later. So it's fascinating. I'd be curious to know how aware they were of the impact of these images on people. Difficult to say, of course.
You know, I'll jump off your point of technology and opening up this type of imagery for around the world. It also touches a bit about what you were talking about, Geneviève, because yes, historically we began as a colony of the United Kingdom, but relationships evolve, and so has the relationship between Canada and the UK. In this case, Canada stepping up just months after this to aid the United Kingdom in the Second World War. To play pivotal roles, an outsized role in the Second World War, punching above our weight, if you will, in terms of military operations. And so, again, you see the fact that this relationship is not just a one-way relationship, but a two-way relationship, and goes to Canada's history. And, you know, as you noted, it might seem odd for an outsider, Geneviève, that, you know, it goes to Canada's sovereignty. But when you look at this film, and you consider the history between 1939, again, this first royal tour of a reigning monarch in this country, to where we are today and the arrival of the King, that relationship has evolved. Canada's relationship has evolved, and in many ways hand in hand with the United Kingdom, because the parliamentary democracy, the Westminster model that was started in the UK, is what we have in this country, and it is the democracy that endures to this day, evidenced by an election that just happened on April the 28th. So you know, it's wonderful to see these images. Bonnie, what comes to mind when you look at this first royal tour?
I'm just sort of taken aback a little bit. I remember, I don't remember it, but I knew the crowds were large. I'd forgotten just how large. And what it must be like for the royal family, who would have experienced that in a lot of countries that they went to, and now as they see the dwindling of the crowds. But I think 24-hour news cycles have changed a whole lot of viewing for people, and it's easier sometimes to watch it at home than it is to go be in a crowd. But I mean, I think it's pretty incredible. I think we haven't taken care of our relationship well enough with the sovereign, you know, with the monarchy. We've had so many political issues, and so we've let it lapse to some extent, and we haven't sort of taken care of the historical relevance of it. And it's pretty apparent when you look at stuff like that today.
And arguably part of it is the fact that, you know, we have for the last 30 years, and it has been to the benefit of this country, talked about closer integration economically with the United States. In many ways that has also meant not so much complete political integration, and I'll ask Geneviève and Laurie to interject there, but just a closer working relationship with the United States, looking to our own continent rather than to our not only historic but our constitutional tie with the monarchy in King Charles, Laurie.
Right. I mean, I think the relationship with the United States, obviously there are economic imperatives around that. There are some ways in which we compare ourselves culturally. We're both very large countries, them much larger in terms of population, but both kind of managing issues around, you know, how to deal with a large country geographically, how to manage the tensions there, how to live harmoniously together when we have very heterogeneous populations, how to be fair, how to move through a lot of issues of racism, colonialism, and the U.S. has dealt with those things very differently than we have. I think sometimes our relationship with the sovereign is complicated by a few factors. One is the sense that it is foreign, that this is not really our head of state, this is somewhere else, and that's constitutionally incorrect. The second piece is I do think at the same time as there's this very important relationship between Canada's Indigenous peoples and the Crown, they are also a representation of colonialism and a history that is very complicated and in many ways very tragic. And so I think that creates some distancing for people in terms of wanting to fully embrace an institution like that. And I think the third piece is a general lack of awareness and clarity around what our Constitution means. Some of our relationship with the U.S. has meant that we sometimes wrap ourselves around some of the cultural symbols they have. Sometimes we understand more about their government than we do about our own. Whereas in fact, and I'm going to just stop here before I launch into a civics lesson that's going to put us all to sleep, but there's a reason why we have a head of state. There's a reason why the king is the head of state and the governor general is the representation of that, as are all the lieutenant governors in the provinces. We can't have a prime minister without a crown. It doesn't work like that. And so when people start talking about, oh, well, let's, we don't need this, let's just not do that, we don't need this kind of colonial piece, we don't need this tie to the monarchy. Trying to pivot would be extremely difficult, and the weight of that, I think, would crush any endeavor in that direction. But there's also a whole lot about our system that works really well, and having the kind of counterpoint in a governor general and a king to a prime minister, having that apolitical part to the political, and the fact that we don't choose our prime minister. It's a much more nuanced kind of hydraulic system where power kind of floats back and forth. It's a wonderful system, actually, but we spend a lot of time thinking about what's wrong with it. And so I think, if we take nothing else from this visit, a moment to reflect on our institutions and how important they are and how well they work a lot of the time. I know they don't work all the time, but neither do any of them. And maybe they would work better if we all sat and thought more about them and how to kind of integrate them a little more into what we need right now and what challenges we're facing.
Yeah, was it Winston Churchill who said democracy is horrible unless you compare it to everything else? Yeah. So everything else that had been tried, Geneviève, you're nodding a lot to what you were hearing from Laurie.
Yes, and I agree completely with what you said. Just an example, l'exemple qui vient en tête,
well, the example that comes to mind, remember when Mark Carney was chosen as Prime Minister, many people said, well, that's not right. He hasn't been elected by Canadians, but that's not how our system works. We're not an American-style system. It's the House of Commons who decides who the next government will be. The House of Commons had been elected. They're the decision maker, and the Governor General, the monarch, can make sure that the rules work properly. So we have a good system. We don't necessarily understand very well. It's not perfect. The American system isn't either. But we should perhaps focus more on the British model in terms of reforming our system, or perhaps look to New Zealand or Australia. Both of these countries have Westminster-style governments, and we could perhaps learn lessons from their efforts at reform. And sometimes our reforms are picked up in other countries as well. We set the pace. We have an interesting system. It's not unique, and I think we can learn from many of our partners.
Laurie and I are teaching it, so
we're doing our part. which is great that you're teaching it, because turning back to what you said earlier, Bonnie, part of it is the fact that Canadians are not taught the role of our head of state. Many Canadians mistakenly, because of arguably our proximity to the United States, has many Canadians thinking we live in a system of a republic. We do not. The head of government, the Prime Minister, is the head of government, not the head of state. And luckily in this moment, when a country as small as Canada is, 41 million, we're growing, but we're still about the size of the state of California. When that 41 million is being threatened by the lone superpower in the world right now, it is comforting, arguably, to have relationships beyond the United States that can remind Canadians that this country is not alone in the world.
And I'd say that's the direction that we're going. Right? We'll go back to our other allies and become spread ourselves out a little bit more, and not just rely on our actually good neighbor and best trading partner, the United States. But yes, we need more people teaching young people at a young age about what the government is in our civic courses, and we're not really doing that very well. I don't know if it's getting any better, but I think
Geneviève and I are great at it.
I know you two are.
Which is why you were invited to the program as often as you are.
But the knowledge is so necessary to help all of us lay people understand how all of this works all the time. I mean, I do it because I've spent time in government, so I got quite comfortable with it, but most people aren't.
Mm-hmm. And it's the type of thing that needs repetition over time. Yeah. It needs you don't absorb it all. Like you've got to start young, but then you don't sort of get everything all in one go, and you have to kind of keep going over it. And then the system, like our system, doesn't write everything down. If you want to know what happens in the U.S., if such and such, most things are enumerated. You go look at the power of the president, the power of the Senate, all that kind of stuff. In our system, everything isn't written down like that, and so sometimes it's about what happens, what everybody agrees is the case in a certain situation. So things like, what happens if the Prime Minister loses confidence? We think we know what happens, but when it happens, sometimes things don't go as planned. And so it requires a constant leaning in and I think a tolerance for some nuance and a little bit of lack of predictability, because it doesn't kind of play out the same every single time. Our system is complicated.
Well, and I saw a lot of that when Trudeau was stepping down, and
100%.
And the confusion with media, with our own, with our media, like nobody could, not you, but nobody could explain it to anybody. Like, it took a while for parliamentary journalists that have been on the Hill for 50 years who couldn't answer those questions either. So.
Because we can, I'll shut up soon, I promise, because we can change leaders completely constitutionally, successfully and legitimately without having an election.
Yes.
And we have, for the American system, the elections are the change moment. We can have change moments without elections. And so there's a bit of a sense of what do you mean he's going to step down? Now what happens? What do you mean the Liberals get to run that? What about this and that? Like, it is a bit unusual, and especially if we're using the U.S. as a roadmap, it's not the right one for us.
Well, to that, just a quick anecdote. When Mark Carney was elected the leader of the Liberal Party, I received this email. What do you mean he's Prime Minister without an election? Is he grabbing power? I'm like, no, that's the Constitution. It just so happens he sought a mandate not that long after. But to your point, that is the system that we have, because we elect not the Prime Minister, we elect parties. And so
Parliament.
The Parliament.
And it's not so complex.
But based on parties, is what I'm trying to say.
But it's not
I just got a B instead of an A. But anyways, yes, Lori.
There will be notes. There will be notes.
But it's not so complex to explain, because you don't have the name of the Prime Minister on the ballot. I mean, so the starter is there. So do you vote for Mark Carney or Justin Trudeau? No, you don't. You vote for MPs, and MPs will choose who will be the next Prime Minister. It's a good system. It's a very decentralized system. It's a very representative system. And so, but we need to explain that a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, I want to quickly show people at home the room in Rideau Hall where we will see essentially the bilateral meetings begin. We will not be there for the full meeting, but in those white chairs in particular, we will see the King at one point with the Governor General, at another point with the Prime Minister. We'll show you those images as those events actually get underway. But again, the media will be allowed to essentially record and transmit the first part of the meeting, but will not be allowed to stay beyond that. But just to show you a bit of the room, and of course, we'll continue our coverage here, Catherine, because while we wait for that bilateral meeting, of course, we have our own teammates on the ground at Rideau Hall right now covering the story as well.
Oui, si vous voulez bien, Michael,
on va aller tout de suite. Michael, let's go over to Omara Issa, who's just outside Rideau Hall as we speak. Omira, what's happening? Doesn't look like there's many people around. What's happening? Can you tell us? Well, yes, Catherine. The official ceremony is over. It ended earlier. There were thousands of people who were here. There was a lot of energy. It was electrifying, very positive. People are starting to leave now.
Let's quickly show the scene inside Rideau Hall. If you can wait for 1 second, Omira, I would just want to show people what's happening right now at Rideau Hall. You see there the King and the Governor General. Let's take a listen. So a brief image, if you will, and apologies for that. We had to interrupt Omira Issa, but Omira, sorry, we'll go back to you right now. You were discussing the very fact that essentially the outside ceremony at Rideau Hall has come to an end.
Yes, exactly. Effectivement, Michael. Et donc,
well, that's what I was saying, Michael. People are starting to leave now. There were thousands of people here. I spoke to many people here, and they all said that the presence of the King sends a strong message on the role of Canada internationally. It shows that Canada has allies. It also sends a message on the sovereignty of the country as well. People were very pleased to be here today. Let's listen to some of them now. What message does it send? Well, I think it's a message of unity and solidarity within Canada. We have difficult issues we have to tackle, but we're going to work together.
I saw his grandfather when he came to Moose Jaw in 1939, and the family scrimped and saved to get tickets to buy in the bleachers, just to watch them go past in the car. They were in Moose Jaw 20 minutes. And just as they passed us, it started to rain, and the Queen Mother had to put her umbrella up. So we only got to see them once when they went back to the station. But it's always fun. You always remember those days, too.
What message does that send, his presence today?
Cohesiveness in our institution. Yeah, I really believe in the setup we have. And the more we can show it off to the world, that's what we should be doing.
It's an important moment in history, and taking 2 days off school, I think, is a valuable lesson that you'll never forget, right? Yeah. Today we saw the election of the Speaker in the House of Commons, and this afternoon we're here, and tomorrow we're looking forward to the big festivity at the Senate for the opening of Parliament. So glad to be here, and the weather is great.
So did you take him out of school for this then?
Yes, from Toronto. We drove yesterday, and then we're here for 2 nights. So looking forward to it. Glad we got a hotel room before they sold out.
Wow, that's remarkable. What message does it send today? Why the need to come here?
It's something I'm sure will be a footnote in a history book or somewhere. So it's important, something that he'll never forget for us, the rest of his life. And it's something you can't really teach with a book. Being there live, even without your phone or recording it, it's something that you'll take with you for a long time.
Les invités, évidemment, la royauté, puis
the royalty, the royal family, and also that's important, and also the lovely weather. Why was it important for you? Well, it's important really because it's a tradition. I like Mr. Carney, and he seems to like the king. So I like the king also.
Canada's not for sale.
Canada's not for sale. That's what your hat says. What's the king's presence? What's the message that it sends today? Well, I think it tells our neighbors that we don't depend on them. That's the message today. Mr. Carney put it very well. Well, he didn't actually say it, but I think it's implied. We're a sovereign country, and we don't want to belong to another country.
I had to come see King Charles and Camilla. After all, I've seen their parents, Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip. Then I was here to see Prince William and Catherine in the spot. So I had to come back today and see King Charles and Camilla.
Why is it important for you to show up every time that the royals are here?
Because they're the royal family. And our connection, don't forget, we're a sovereign nation. We're part of the Commonwealth. And I've been to London. No, I haven't been in to have tea with them. But no, I mean, that's Canada. We're part of it. I mean, gee, we always had to come with the royal family or have to come and see them. Yeah.
Alors voilà, on a entendu
les Canadiens just heard from Canadians who came to greet the royal family here today.
Thank you for that, Omira Issa, on the grounds of Rideau Hall. I'm going to start this by saying I love that dad. I love that dad that he took his son out of school to witness all of this as it unfolds, because this is a bit of history and arguably teaching his son something that as we were talking about prior, is not always talked about enough in schools. Although, I also want to play back and excuse us. We were trying to show you the bilateral meeting, at least as it began with the King and the Governor General. We're going to play back that piece of tape for you in full. Take a look at what happened just moments ago in Rideau Hall. So there you have it, the beginning of the meeting between King Charles and Governor General Mary Simon. That meeting continues right now, but behind closed doors. But the media were allowed to transmit the earlier part of the meeting, and we'll also have another transmit of the bilateral meeting that will take place in about 10 minutes' time between the Prime Minister and the King as well. But, you know, let's futurecast a little bit, and I'll bring both Genevieve and Laurie into this right now, because we saw just earlier this morning the election of a new Speaker for the House of Commons. And really that is job one for any new Parliament, because until that happens, a throne speech cannot be delivered, and that is what will happen tomorrow, and which is why King Charles is here. Laurie, talk to us about the ceremony, the tradition, the laws that govern what we saw this morning and what we'll see tomorrow.
Okay, so for the Speaker selection, basically every MP is eligible to give that a shot. You have to take your name off. And so by the time 6 o'clock last night comes around, you've got a list of people who want to put their names forward. It ended up being Francis Scarpaleggia from the Liberals. And if I had been a betting woman, I would have put my money on a Conservative, actually, because I thought, you know, given the closeness of the seat count between the Liberals and the opposition benches, the fact that the Liberals are not a majority government, I figured that they would probably want to support a Conservative like Chris d'Entremont, for example, who was the Deputy Speaker, who has, I think is known as a pretty level hand, a very civil guy, not highly partisan. And I would have put my money on Chris d'Entremont. He was the Deputy Speaker as well, but not to be. They didn't take too long to choose Mr. Scarpaleggia. He's a pretty long-serving MP from Quebec. And
since 2004.
Right. And so this will be his job to figure out how to make this place a bit more civilized than it has been before. I am hoping that we will see a bit of a reset in terms of the tone in the House of Commons. As we were saying before, like, they haven't met since prior to the holiday. And so, you know, the House of Commons has been empty for several months now. But in the months before the holiday, from October onward, it was not good in there. They were not passing legislation. They were swiping at one another. They were caught in a motion of privilege that was not resolved. But it was just day after day of honestly, you know, the kind of back and forth, really hostile partisanship to the point of toxicity. And so I don't think anybody's benefiting from that. And so I'm hopeful that this is going to be a bit of a new era.
Yeah, you know, before we go to you, Genevieve, I'm just going to quickly share a story about that, because my cousin, she's a high school teacher, and every year they have a trip to Ottawa. And this year they chose not to go to Parliament Hill because they did not want to expose the kids to what was happening on the floor, because an earlier class had done something like that, gone to the Hill. And those kids were just horrified and couldn't believe these were adults and this country's political leaders. So to just a bit of antidote to what you had to say. But, you know, as well as Genevieve, so we now have the Speaker, Mr. Scarpaleggia, as we noted. Although I will also note that Chris d'Entremont and the other Conservative, John Nader, they started the day by withdrawing their names from contention. So at the end of the day, it was just was it 6 Liberals that were up for the Speaker's chair today. But that does set up the ability now to have the throne speech tomorrow, Genevieve.
Oui, on a besoin, on peut pas faire le discours du trône si on n'a pas le président.
Well, you can't hold a throne speech if you don't have a speaker, and you can't put forward legislation if you don't have a throne speech. So there's a very important sequence that has to be followed. So what needed to be done was to elect the Speaker of the House, who's elected by his peers. So the procedure has changed. It used to be the government that chose the Speaker. Now he's elected by a secret ballot. Tomorrow we'll have the throne speech. Once the throne speech has been read and presented, it's at that point that work can start. There are lots of things that have to be done. Bills will have to be tabled. There are 2 that will be tabled to bring about tax cuts, the other on interprovincial trade. Mr. Carney has said that he wants this to be done by the 1st of July, so it has to be done now this month. There's also the budget that has to be, or appropriations that have to be adopted in the House, so we'll have to do that work, and the committees have to be struck. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in 4 weeks. Things are going to move very, very quickly. I think that the House will sit in the evenings and even throughout the night sometimes. About 100 members who are new also, so they've been following training for the past couple of weeks, but they have got a steep learning curve. And then there's a relationship between the House of Commons and the Senate. The Senate hasn't changed. Will this government be able to work properly with the Senate? The Senate's needed to pass legislation, so you can see what still needs to be done. It all starts tomorrow.
And the very fact steeped in the tradition, as you say, and rules that we follow, because the monarch is not allowed in the House of Commons, as is the tradition. So we'll see all of that unfold tomorrow, and it actually begins again 10 a.m. Eastern Time. What we will see tomorrow is the Landau making its way across Wellington, and a lot of this is also adapted because of the very fact that Parliament Hill, as evidenced by the cranes behind me, is under reconstruction, renovation right now, and so we do have the temporary Parliament in the West Block of Parliament Hill. The Senate has been moved in what was the old conference center where Meech Lake was negotiated, where the Constituent Assembly of the 1982 Constitution, where they met, but that has now been created as a temporary Senate. That is where the Landau will make its way tomorrow between 10 to 10:15 a.m. Eastern Time, and that is from where the gentleman usher with the black rod will call upon members of Parliament to make their way, not walking across the hall, but in buses to the Senate to listen to the King's speech as he delivers the throne speech. And you know, I want to play a bit more of historic tape for you, because as we talk about the throne speech tomorrow, take a look at this piece of video. This was the 1957 throne speech, and this was the first time a reigning monarch delivered the throne speech here in Canada. You see there making, this was the Queen. First visited Canada in 1951 as a young princess, a 5-week tour. This was her making her way to the Senate, where she read the throne speech. And really, you were talking earlier, Bonnie, about what perhaps Camilla would wear. Well, in this reading of the throne speech, this is actually the Queen's coronation dress. She wore it for the opening of Parliament in 1957. So arguably not the same wardrobe we'll see tomorrow.
But it's also the dress that her granddaughter, Princess Beatrice, was married in.
Oh.
Her grandmother's coronation dress. They restyled it.
Well, and look at it right now in full view, and we will say that this is the black and white visuals. This was what would have been broadcast across television, but it has also been colorized, and this is what it looks like in full color. And take a look. You see there John Diefenbaker. He was Prime Minister in 1957 with the opening of this Parliament, although, interesting tidbit here, it was Louis Saint Laurent who organized this visit, because Louis Saint Laurent was convinced he would be Prime Minister in 1957 and would be able to open Parliament with the Queen. And you're nodding and you're laughing here, Geneviève.
Yes. How Canadian politics is full of surprises. So, again, it goes back to what we say, it's a tradition. So there's one person after the next, but it's not the personality, it's the institution that matters.
The institutions, and of course, when you think about Queen Elizabeth, the length of her reign, this was 1957. She passes away in 2022, and so there is this long through line. Think of how many prime ministers have been in the prime minister's office from the year of John Diefenbaker to Justin Trudeau, which is the length of Queen Elizabeth's reign. It really is quite remarkable when you think about the continuity the Crown represents in this country, Bonnie.
I'm curious with the two thrones, if it's the King and the Queen that are sitting there tomorrow, not the Prime Minister.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I think.
I don't know,
Right,
not the Governor General.
And not the Governor. Sorry, not the Governor General. That's because the King's reading it. So, and I'm assuming the Queen takes precedence over the Governor General, right? So that'll be interesting how they work all that out in the House tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. But you know, it's I will say that this is my first opening of Parliament, the throne speech from this position here at CPAC. And, you know, Bonnie and I have worked with each other for a number of years, going back to even before the CBC, the CTV days.
CTV days.
But this is the first, and I'm one of those political nerds that would always watch the opening of Parliament because I love the ceremony around it. I love the tradition around it. So I look forward to what will unfold tomorrow. And it really does take this different flavor, this different importance now, the fact that it will be the king that's actually arrived to be reading the speech.
Definitely ups the game, right, with them here. And all the fun is behind the curtains, okay, not in the house.
Oh, do tell.
But there will be some former prime ministers in the gallery, is my understanding, tomorrow. Whoever's, I guess, able to come will be there. So that'll be interesting to see who all's up there.
Well, I'll keep an eye out on for Prime Minister Chrétien, because I just saw him across the street last week when I went to grab my lunch. So, so 91 and still making his way or making the rounds.
He's always there. He's always there.
Absolutely. Geneviève, what will you be watching for tomorrow?
Juste une petite histoire personnelle.
Well, a personal story. The pages, and I was teaching the pages this year, and there was no work for them. I said, well, wait, there's an election, and then after the election it's going to get very interesting. And now they're going to have the opportunity to meet the king. Very few pages have had that opportunity. No pages have ever seen the monarch read the throne speech. The page program was created in 1978, so it's going to be a very exciting time for these students who for months had nothing to do because the house wasn't sitting. And of course, I'm very, very happy for them.
You know who was the parliamentary page? Who was Joël Denis Bellevance, and I love his story because, and I'm sorry, Joël Denis, I'm stealing your story. So he becomes a journalist, wanting to become a sports journalist to cover the Montreal Canadiens. He becomes a parliamentary page and decides, actually, this is the more interesting game. You know, more than hockey, this is the more interesting game. And so, you know, it is this, and given now in particular, just again, how much that has happened between January till where we are now at the end of May is really quite breathtaking what this country's gone through.
I can't imagine how Carney's even sort of, you know, himself, from what's happened to him in the last 4 or 5 months, and then the election, and in many ways it was close, you know, when you think of it in the way the distribution of the seats have started to shake out a little bit. But yeah, it's been a whirlwind a bit for the country, started by Donald Trump, which kind of forced a whole bunch of things, and to go all the way back to Chrystia Freeland, because she's the one that really initiated Prime Minister Trudeau's resignation. So there's a lot of important players in this.
Absolutely, and I'm sorry to interrupt there, but let's go right back to Rideau Hall. Let's take a listen now as the Prime Minister makes his way to meet the King. And there you have it, the media allowed to see just the beginning of that meeting as the King greeted the Prime Minister, the start of their bilateral meeting. You know, this is so different though, Catherine, because you know, I was in Washington when Prime Minister Carney went down to meet President Trump, and clearly the two would then go on, have lunch, and there were discussions about where Canada and the United States would move forward. But in this case, it is a monarch. It is the head of state meeting the head of government. You know, I do wonder about what is accomplished in this type of bilateral meeting versus the bilateral meeting of two heads of government, as we saw with Trump and Carney.
Absolument. Et ce qui est intéressant, c'est que c'est un peu le
What's
point d'orgue de
interesting
cette
is
visite
really the central point of this visit. It's also the end of, we were talking to Bonnie about this, it's the end of a time of important change. It's going to be interesting to see how historians will write about this period. So it's the departure of Chrystia Freeland in a very dramatic way. You remember, not long ago, but so many things have happened. It looks like it was years ago when she announced her intention to resign. It was the day of the fall economic statement, and then events really multiplied at a very fast pace. So everything we've experienced since then has been incredible, culminating in today's visit. And today we feel that things have quietened down somewhat. Of course, there will be future problems. There will be lots of them. Of course, there will. But the period we've just gone through was so spectacular and dramatic and of concern and worrying. Now, with the monarchs here in Canada, an official visit, allied countries. We've said that during this show today, time and time again. The monarch who has agreed to deliver the throne speech, which sets out the priorities of the government for the remainder of the session. Now we're at the start of a new period in the summer, and Mark Carney has said this several times. He intends to work very hard. There are many things that have to be done because Parliament hasn't sat for months now. Now we're starting a period which is more predictable. That's the way it feels anyway, until the summer is going to be interesting, what people will write about this period, what people will say about it, especially from December to now, which has been so decisive in our history.
Years into like 6 months, 5 months at that. But they talked to us about this bilateral meeting. What can effectively be accomplished? Again, it's different than two heads of government meeting here. It's the head of state, Canada's head of state, meeting with the head of government.
Right. I mean, I think certainly they know each other. They are friendly. So I think it'll be I would expect it would be a warm meeting, but a productive one in the sense that although King Charles doesn't have a role politically, he certainly has causes that he champions. He has things that he cares about. He's not shy about that. And I think that there's quite a bit of overlap, frankly, between he and the Prime Minister. And so I think they'll talk about those sorts of things. We are about to host the G7, and with lots of people who the King is very familiar with. And so I think just thinking about the different role that Mark Carney has played prior to becoming Prime Minister. I was doing some research for an article, and I was looking up comments that world leaders have made about him. And a former Australian Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, said, this guy is brilliant, this guy is a huge intellect. If he weren't the Prime Minister, whoever the Prime Minister is would want to hire him. That's how good he is. And so, not that I'm trying to trumpet for Mark Carney here, I'm just trying to say, this guy is a different kind of Rolodex. There are different phone numbers in his cell phone than there is for a lot of other people who have been Prime Minister of this country. And so I think he's coming to this as someone who already has experience as a world leader, and he knows the King in connection with that. So I suspect this will be a very nice conversation.
Mm-hmm. Geneviève?
Je pense qu'il y a deux objectifs. Il y a l'image publique.
Goals here. There's the public image.
Et avez-vous remarqué comme c'est l'image qu'on a
Did you see
on était quasiment à la Maison Blanche. Il y avait un foyer,
how
deux
it looked
sièges,
like at
c'était
the White House? Two seats, white seats, but it was so relaxed. I wonder to what extent all that has been choreographed to contrast Rideau Hall with the White House, for example. So that's a message that's being sent to the whole world. At the same time, King Charles talks to the British Prime Minister every week, and King Charles is aware of what's going on in government, and he can provide advice, he can provide his own advice. But there'll be an exchange of information which will be useful for Canada as well. I think that Mr. Carney knows a lot about that. And he used that to send messages to others. The King knows a lot of people in other countries. But the British Prime Minister is also very important. He'll be the G7. So I think that Canada will be playing that card as well.
Is accomplished in a meeting like this?
Well, first of all, I think the two of them understand optics and of television as well. So I would say they'd be pretty happy with, the Prime Minister is probably saying, thank you, my friend, for coming, right? Like this. But it's also working for King Charles as well, right? So it's kind of it's an equal opportunity for both of them to help themselves and their countries and the monarchy. So I would say that they would be having that sort of conversation, and they're probably talking a little bit about the speech from the throne tomorrow. Are you good with it? Are you comfortable with it? No more changes? You know, they'll have that kind of back and forth because it's clear that they know each other well. And then it's probably about, you know, should we have a drink? I mean, I think, you know, it's the end of the day.
A long day.
A long day. But no, it'll be serious, but it will have light moments and it will be warm because a lot of success in diplomacy is from friendships that are actually developed as much as they can be. And you can develop a friendship with the king because he's been here for a long time. So if you're lucky enough to be in his atmosphere for a long period of time, you too can form these positive, you know, relationships to work together moving forward. So I think that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, you know, when you talk about looking over the throne speech and getting some feedback as to whether or not he's okay, I guess, with the wording and how it moves forward, it does make me wonder about the challenge of this moment, not constitutionally for the king, but physically. Because, you know, he is a man that has, as we noted earlier, has been dealing with cancer. He's had struggles with his health. It has impeded his own schedule when he's in the UK, and here he is flying overseas to this country to take part in a very, very busy 24 hours, as evidenced by, as we'll show you here, once again, events like the walkabout at Lansdowne Park just a couple of hours ago. I will say that you wouldn't note, you wouldn't immediately remark here, as he's greeted by Stephen Guilbeault at Lansdowne Park, that he is visibly dealing with any health issues. But Bonnie, he is. So could you talk to us a bit about the challenge of this visit for the monarch?
Of course, it would be a challenge for any of us of a certain age, aside from being ill. So I think that's why the schedule has been the way that it is. It's fairly tight. It's been fairly quick moving. And they've got him in at a decent time so that he can soon have some downtime. But they will be challenging. But you know, one thing that royals are taught from a very young age is that when you're on, you're on. So you step up. So unless he couldn't hide it because he wasn't feeling well, you'll never know. So he will want to get some rest tonight and be prepared to read a speech that might take 30 or 40 minutes. Like, I don't really know how long this one is tomorrow, but it's taxing on anyone to sort of just keep up with a speech like that. So that's why there's, to my mind, and I think they don't think they needed it, was a state dinner or any kind of reception tonight. I think it's just too much for him, and it's a royal trip, but it's a working trip. We are here to sort of get some business done. So we don't need to have the pomp and pageantry of a dinner and ball gowns and all that kind of stuff and jewels. Let's get to work and let's get a few things done.
And you can't make mistakes.
You can't make mistakes. And he doesn't want to make a mistake tomorrow.
Yeah.
So, and I would think that a lot of his tours, I haven't been following it as much in the UK, but they've all become less, like shorter and less events in a day kind of thing, because it's had to work around literally his treatment schedule as well, and then the days that he needs rest. So, but you know, I think they should be pretty happy with what they've got, what's taken place so far today.
Well, again, you know, such a warm reception, evidenced by the images we're looking at right now, and this was earlier today. You can see hundreds of people gathered, perhaps thousands. I don't have the official count yet, but really, that when you think of Lansdowne Park, that is not a very big space to begin with, but people were packing it in. It's 40 acres to get a view of the monarch as he arrives in this country to deliver the throne speech tomorrow. So yeah, it's interesting that we are seeing this. I'm wondering, Laurie, how much of what the king has had to deal with in terms of his health factored into the planning of this visit, do you think?
Well, I mean, to echo some of the things that Bonnie has said, we see a short trip. We see a trip that doesn't have you know, the things like a state dinner, things that would require, you know, him staying up late into the night kind of thing, and continuing with a lot of social energy and making the conversation and making jokes and all that kind of stuff. Like, they're 5 hours ahead of us, and so they've been up and at this for quite some time. And so I think probably
it's already 9:14
exactly,
p.m. London
exactly,
time, UK.
Right? And so like they've put in a day already, and so I think, you know, probably something like that. You're just looking at, this is not the trip for that. This is like he's getting things done, and tomorrow he'll get up, do the throne speech, that sort of thing, and then, you know, come early afternoon, that's the end of it. And I think that kind of to build on that a little bit, has nothing to do with his health. I think in the moment, the optics of a really opulent state dinner would be very difficult. That is not why he's here. I think Canada is in a very, you know, we've got an affordability crisis, we've got a housing crisis, we're dealing with the economic uncertainty of the situation with the U.S. and with Donald Trump, which is a big, of course, is a big theme that's hanging over this whole thing. And so I think the things the way they are now, having this time with the public, doing the tree planting, meeting the people he has to meet, he does a speech from the throne, that's it, is going to leave a much more favorable impression than if there were photos of jewels and opulence and expenditure and largesse at this point. I agree. Yeah, I just don't think that would be the right moment, and they're not doing that, so that's great.
You're nodding your head emphatically,
I agree with
Bonnie.
that. It's not the time for it. We'll get a little tease of it tomorrow because they'll be in the Landau, probably the one that the Queen was in, because I think that's the Queen's carriage that's coming out tomorrow. So, you know, and it's only for about 15 or 20 minutes. It'll be short with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police horses, the musical ride. So I think that'll actually be quite nice, and that'll be just enough for tomorrow for people that are struggling with their own financial issues at home. The opulence you have to be very careful with.
Which, you know, from everything I've read, the royal family in general has been very attuned to that and been concerned about that, because that is the criticism, at least that they face, particularly in the United Kingdom, about the public person and the cost of maintaining the royal family.
Yeah, and they're trying to figure out how to unload a few of them. So easier said than done, right? Yeah. So but they are slimming it down. Actually, some of the older ones are dying as well. So now they're just dealing with the children of, you know, Andrew, like all the siblings.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And which ones become officially working royals, right? So all of that, you know, but you know, I think it also speaks a little bit to, and I don't know who wants to talk about this, but the importance that Canada takes for the royal family and preserving the role here in Canada, being aware of that, because, you know, it's not, and I think you were noting it earlier, Geneviève, it's not as much of a vociferous debate as we saw in Australia, for example, where things became very passionate about whether or not they continue with having a constitutional monarchy. But in terms of the importance of Canada to the Commonwealth, it still is one of the major players for the monarchy.
And Canada on the international scene, sur la scène internationale, le Canada joue un rôle important.
The international stage, Canada is an important player. We're a G7 member, to start with that. What would happen to the Commonwealth if Canada withdrew from the Commonwealth? If there was no link to the British Crown, many other countries would probably follow suit. The monarchy is still solid here, robust, remains to be seen. The young generations are less interested in the monarchy. That perhaps has a lot to do with the way we teach history. That's a major factor. There were challenges in Quebec and other areas of the country as well. The traditions are being challenged, so you shouldn't think that we can take it for granted. Everything's going well today, everyone's happy, of course, but there are severe criticism of the monarchy, of the institution. The cost, for example, the cost of the Governor-General in Canada as well. That's a source of debate. So if we wanted to keep our ties with the UK and the Commonwealth and the monarchy, we're going to have to work on this. you can't just think that it's there forever, because it's quite fragile, I think, for some people, not for everyone in Canada, but for some people, especially young people. They're not quite as interested in a monarchy as their parents and grandparents were.
The tension between not so much King Charles as the king of this country, but the tensions between the British Prime Minister and the Canadian Prime Minister, because in many ways they face similar challenges. They both have tariff threats up against the United States. There is a security threat because Canada still very much is committed to supporting Ukraine against Russian aggression and what potential impact that may actually have to European security. And yet there is tension between the two offices, perhaps best encapsulated by the very fact when Keir Starmer was asked to comment on Canadian sovereignty when he was in the United States at the White House in February. He basically blamed the media for trying to create a problem and find differences between he and the U.S. president rather than standing up for Canadian sovereignty.
Right. So I think that from the get-go, when Trump started making these comments about 51st state, and this was like back when, even before the inauguration, when he was at Mar-a-Lago and then Prime Minister Trudeau and some ministers and staff went down with him and things like that. Even at that point, when people started to say, is he serious about this or not, there was a lot of eyes looking toward Canada's allies to say, is anybody going to stand here with us, or are we alone here? And he wasn't making the same types of comments about other countries. Like, I mean, clearly Greenland, Panama Canal, yes, but there was a sense in which, you know, among other allied countries, among Five Eyes, are we standing here by ourselves? Is anybody kind of going to sort of stand with us? What's going on here? And I think for Prime Minister Starmer, for example, it seemed like there was a bit of eggshell walking. He doesn't necessarily want to say anything that's going to amplify or escalate a conflict between himself and Trump. But at the same time, Canada's relationship with the U.S. is very unique. As much as all of the G7 countries around the world are going to be affected by some sort of tariff war as launched by Trump on account of all the ways in which he thinks that the U.S. is aggrieved, no one is going to be affected like Canada is. Because our supply chains are so entwined, because our various provinces have their own unique trading partnerships with the United States, it's just we're in a very unique situation.
Et je pense aussi, si vous permettez, Michael, qu'il y a la relation du Canada, la relation que le Canada
the relationship that Canada wants to develop with the EU and European countries, all that remains to be developed. And this is a relationship that Canada wants to focus on now. At the behest of Canada, Europe has said, yes, we want to develop these ties with Canada. Canada is very important, but the UK is no longer part of the EU since Brexit, so it's a complicated relationship between the EU and the English. There are many people who have not yet accepted Brexit and across the English Channel either. So all that, I think, has colored the relationship between Canada and the UK. That's undoubtedly so. And now we feel that Mr. Starmer's going it alone in restoring or rebuilding a relationship with the Americans. I don't know if that's your reading, but many countries feel this is the case. They feel that they're going it alone without Europe. It's difficult to understand what the UK is trying to do, what their aims are. When Brexit took place, the English said that they would reach out to Canada for a free trade agreement, and that would be a way into the North American market. For several reasons, that wasn't possible. Now, the UK is alone and is endeavoring to benefit from the relationship with the Americans. But the British are in a very uncomfortable position, more uncomfortable than the Canadians, in fact. Publicly, we didn't get much support from other countries, from our allies, in a difficult time for Canada. I think other countries were waiting to see and trying to see what was happening. But I think there was support for Canada. They weren't hostile to Canada. But the situation is so volatile that you only have to say the wrong word, and the American president will speak out. So I think all leaders are being very, very careful in what they say. Even King Charles's reaction to the to the deteriorating relationship between Canada and the U.S. Many people expected him to speak out. This was before Mark Carney became Prime Minister. People were waiting for the King to actually say something. People felt bitter. People wanted him to speak out and say something. He did eventually say something, and we can see it again today. However, it did perhaps color the relationship between the UK and Canada.
And we'll see where that relationship actually goes, because you know, just this morning, the CPC was reporting that the UK High Commissioner here in Canada says that the British government is essentially waiting for the Canadian government to get back to business, to get back into governing before they reopen free trade negotiations. So we'll see where that actually goes in the next little while. Let's quickly go back to Rideau Hall right now. You see there a photo opportunity taking place there between the monarchs and the Prime Minister and his wife, and we do apologize. You know, we're going to re-cue that up for you so you can see that in full. So do stay with us. We're talking a little bit over that moment, but we'll replay that moment for you because, of course, of great consequence here, the fact that the King, as well as Queen Camilla, are meeting the Prime Minister and his wife, Diana Fox Carney. So we'll have that for you again as the bilateral meetings wrap up at Rideau Hall, which really means that we're nearing the end of today's official events. The last one really is essentially the family photo, if you will, of the vice-regals in this country. But before we get there, let's take a look at what happened at Rideau Hall just moments ago. So the official photo, you know, I want to pick up again a bit of the previous conversation, Bonnie, if you don't mind. How difficult is it for Buckingham Palace when there are differences, and necessarily there will be differences because the Commonwealth of Nations have different priorities? How difficult is that for Buckingham Palace to navigate?
Well, for a long time they didn't navigate, right? They were always kind and good to any other countries of the Commonwealth, but they didn't always sort of, again, jump into it. Whereas now, it's a different time, it's a different era, and what you do is so public now that there's no hiding anything. You actually have to have discussions and work things through. And I mean, I remember during apartheid, Prime Minister Mulroney having private conversations with the Queen to talk about things that she couldn't talk about publicly, but she was very much in support of the work that they were doing. And the King's been doing that for a long time as well, having all kinds of private conversations with world leaders on issues that he can't or hasn't. It's not that he can't, and that we may start to see that change a little bit. But I think if they get too political, they lose their the magicalness of a monarchy. So I think they're trying to sort of, you know, their answer is to be helpful to all, right? And especially those that are within the Commonwealth. And they have been abiding by those rules for a very, very long time. But the King, you can tell he does like to jump into stuff. So I think it's a bit harder for him to, because he has views. He, you know, he's well read and learned and educated, and he knows what's going on. So it's got to be, it would be a bit frustrating.
Mm-hmm. And we do know his views, so much so that we know that he is passionate about architecture, about the preservation of land, about organic growing, and the environment. We know these things because he has spoken out. Even the very fact that the Prince's Trust has chosen certain groups and charities to support versus others.
But even the prosperity agreement that the Prime Minister of UK has signed or is in agreement with the US impacts the fortunes of farmers. So the King will be very sort of, you know, trying to stay between Canada and the UK. And all these leaders are going to be together in, what, a month in Alberta? I think that's
in
where,
Kananaskis.
So, in Kananaskis. So a lot of stuff that's not done today will be discussed. Like, that'll be actually a really fascinating meeting, the G7 with, and Trump is coming apparently. So this, I'd love to be a fly on a wall, or I'd like to be a staffer at this one to just sort of sit and listen to how these negotiations are going to go and all the bilaterals that will take place beforehand, the one-on-ones.
Well, and you know, that is, as you say, a month away, so we'll see how Kananaskis works out. Underlining what I said earlier, we have been working in warp speed here since the new year began. So a lot that will be shown. And you know, I'm going to ask here because I want to get a little bit back to the relationship between Canada and you know the monarchy. Of course. Prince William is next in line after King Charles. He is the Prince of Wales. Before he was the Prince of Wales, he and Catherine, right after their wedding, did come to Canada to have a national tour. It went very well. A bit of reminiscence here, and we're going to pick up with the discussion point about the relationship between this country and the monarchy. But take a look at this piece of video from William and Catherine's visit to Canada.
For generations, royal tours have tried to forge links between the Crown and Canadians. Now, opinions vary about the monarchy, but one thing is certain, the 2011 tour was like no other before it. 2 months after the wedding of Prince William and Kate Middleton, the new Duke and Duchess of Cambridge descended on Canada, bringing along a wave of worldwide media attention.
Instilled in us by our parents and grandparents who love this country, we've been looking forward to this moment for a very long time. And before we were married, we had a longing to come here together.
There were the traditional elements of a royal tour in Ottawa. The Duke and Duchess met veterans, paid tribute to Canada's war dead, and helped welcome new Canadian citizens. But this was billed as a showcase for the future of the royal family, and not just for the 300,000 jammed onto Parliament Hill for Canada Day and a glimpse of the world's most famous newlyweds. Right across Canada, the unconventional itinerary included a cooking class in Montreal, foosball in Quebec City, street hockey in Yellowknife, and in PEI, beachside barbecues, a dragon boat race against each other, and piloting a Sea King. There was an unscheduled stop in Slave Lake, Alberta to meet those devastated by wildfires. And in Calgary, there was the late Diamond Marshall, a 6-year-old cancer patient who wanted to meet a princess.
In 1939, my great-grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, said of her first tour of Canada with her husband, King George VI, "Canada made us." Catherine and I now know very well what she meant. Canada has far surpassed all that we were promised. Our promise to Canada is that we shall return. Thank you.
And our thanks to Andrew Thompson for putting that piece together. You know, that royal tour was a very successful royal tour, Bonnie, for Canada and certainly for the royals, because really, central casting, how can you get better than Prince William and Princess Catherine?
And she had the brooch on that Camilla's wearing, but that was her first official foreign trip ever after their marriage, so that was a big deal for her, you know, and she was shy like she was at that. She's not so shy anymore, but she certainly was then. But that was a big deal for Canada, and people loved it. The crowds came out and they were big, and they're the future. They're the hope. That was the beginning of, okay, so this is what's next. So I think it's still nice, and I think it still stands that way, that King Charles and his son have such a good and close relationship, and that the nurturing and the mentoring is taking place. It has been for a long time to help William whenever that day may come. You know, how long, none of us know when anything will ever change, but just prepping him. And also, he'll be a king of, you know, technology.
I'm going to interrupt very quickly. I want to show the scene right now at Rideau Hall. Queen Camilla signing the Golden Book, the guest book at Rideau Hall, to be sworn in today as a member of the Privy Council of Canada. Let's just take a listen. And our apologies for the quality of the video. As we were noting earlier on, because of the weather, it's been changing here in Ottawa. The best information we have is that the weather is affecting some of the video quality we're getting out of Rideau Hall. I will say that there are actually cameras physically, or were cameras in that room physically recording what took place. So as soon as we get better images of that, we will have that for you here. But you know, Bonnie, before I rudely cut you off there, I do want to follow up on a point though, because as you said, the trip that Catherine and William took here soon after their marriage was the first one for the now Princess of Wales overseas. That must say something about how the royal family views Canada and Canadians, that this was the country that they agreed to send Catherine to on her first official outing, having married the prince.
Well, and that would have come from suggestions from the Queen herself that this is the country that Catherine should go to first. For obvious reasons. You know, you heard William in his speech, you know, comment from what his mother and or the Queen Mother said about Canada is the place, right? Like, this is a country that we value and that we watch and we have learned from. They've always been very complimentary about how Canada has brought herself up with a small population and vast geography. And I think they thought that that would be a good experience for her to come here. And it was. And they handled the whole situation really well with William and Kate after they got married, allowing them to go off for a year or two, him as a helicopter rescue pilot, and she could be basically a housewife but a princess in training, you know, and they could have some privacy. Because other members, and I'll just say it because Sarah Ferguson was married to Prince Andrew. He went off to the military and she only saw her husband 50 days a year for 4 years because they wouldn't allow her to live on the military you know, with him on the base, which today that wouldn't happen. So a lot of, you know, things revolve, and I actually think he might be in a better situation today had he been able to stabilize his own marriage and his own life in a better way. But so you can see the nurturing in Catherine today.
Here and I'm sorry to interrupt again. Rideau Hall here. This is the vice-regal family photo, if you will. The King and the Queen with the various lieutenant governors, excuse me, from across the country. And that is the photo. Let's take a listen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
There we go. A rare moment to be able to get all the vice-regals together in one place for a photo, but obviously so important is this moment. Again, reading the throne speech tomorrow, but the first visit of the king to this country since Charles essentially ascended to the throne. Tomorrow it now moves on to the throne speech. And again, it will be King Charles that will be reading it. I'm wondering if you would comment about what you're looking forward to about that, what you're watching out for, and or even the significance of this moment for this country. You know, Geneviève, I'll get you to start.
Monsieur Carney est dans une
Well,
position
Mr. Carney's in a difficult position. It's a key moment. There's a lot of hope riding on this speech, but he hasn't had much time to prepare it. He's been in politics for only 4 or 5 months now. It's not enough. He's still looking for a chief of staff. There are many other things he's looking for as well. What we've seen over the past few weeks is the same message, the same documents, the mandate letters last week, a few press conferences. He's always saying the same thing, same message. I don't know what he's going to change. Housing is important, interprovincial trade. There'll be 7 points that are in the mandate letters, but decorum in the House. What will Charles's attitude be? Where will Mark Carney sit? Will be a wind of change. So symbolically, they can do a lot. I think that's what I'll be keeping an eye on. But substantively, I expect to hear what I've been hearing for the past 5 weeks.
But it's
an important moment. Mark Carney, despite the difficulties you mentioned, Geneviève, can't make mistakes even if he hasn't much time to prepare. Why? Because his campaign was to reassure people. He won by reassuring Canadians, vote for me, everything will be okay. We'll do what we have to succeed. That's basically what he said. Canadians awarded him with a minority government, but many MPs are a huge minority government. Now it's up to him to do what he said he would do, what he promised. I haven't had much time to prepare, but I'm going to act very quickly. I'll get down to work. I'm going to roll up my sleeves. I'm going to ask my team to do the same. That's what people expect of him starting tomorrow. Get down to it. He's going to have to do things by the end of a session, and that's in a month's time. And he's going to have to start executing his promises. There are some promises that have an expiry date, the 1st of July. So people will be watching him, and people expect that he meets the moment and that he actually fulfills his promises. Laurie.
I am totally hooked on the pomp and circumstance of the whole thing, so I'm pretty excited just to see it. Like, honestly, it doesn't happen all the time, and it is part of the excitement of having the king here and all that, so I'm excited to see all that. But then we've learned a little bit about what the Prime Minister wants to focus on. We know kind of right out of the gate he wants to have legislation around taking down the interprovincial trade barriers. He wants to have legislation to fast-track some infrastructure projects, and also for a tax cut for the middle class. And so beyond that, what else are we going to learn about what he wants to do and how he plans to do it? This is a minority government Prime Minister. It's not going to feel that way tomorrow. Tomorrow it's going to feel like you know, everything is so secure, and we're not going to see a lot of that inter-party bickering and things like that come through tomorrow. It's going to be more of a kind of ceremonial day, I think, but we're still going to see something about what the government plans to do, and we have the knowledge that this is going to be a complicated parliament in a lot of ways. I'm interested to see, and we won't learn this tomorrow at all, but I'm interested to see how often, how much the Prime Minister plans to meet Parliament, how much he plans to put through legislation, because everything he puts through there, then he engages the committee process, then he engages the legislative process in figuring out how he's going to put the votes together to get everything through. There's quite a bit that a Prime Minister can do without going to the legislature. And especially when we're talking about making deals with other countries and things like that, and using that position that he has as head of government. He doesn't have to go to Parliament for everything. And so I'm wondering how he's going to balance that out, especially given the minority.
Yeah, absolutely, because it does have an impact at the committee level.
Yeah, that's where it gets a bit complicated.
Absolutely. Bonnie, what will you be watching out for, or thoughts about today?
The one thing I've come to learn after a few years in politics is, for me, the role of the king tomorrow is to bring some hope and inspire people to actually care about their national identity, and to fight for it, and to nurture it, and to be proud of it. And so if he can master a little bit of that tomorrow, I think it'll be a good day for the country.
I'll end by saying I'm watching for two things. One, considering only one ministerial letter went out for every minister in cabinet, I wonder how laser focused, if this throne speech will be at all laser focused tomorrow. So keeping an eye out for that.
I think it should be surrounded by that.
Yeah. And then the other piece I'm watching for, much like you, the pomp and circumstance, but more than pomp and circumstance, the symbolism. Because a country cannot just rely on the drudging in, drudging out, but the symbols are what unite a country as well. And so for that, I look for the continuity of this democracy that is Canada, this parliamentary democracy. So all of that happening with the throne speech tomorrow. Again, the landau carrying King Charles to the Senate will be at 10 a.m. Eastern. The King will be in the Senate by 10:15. And all of that you can watch, including the throne speech itself, right here on CPAC. We'll have live coverage for you all Eastern time, I should note, but we'll have it here on CPAC, the channel, CPAC, our website, and on our YouTube channel as well. But for now, I'm Michael Serapio. I thank Bonnie Brownlee, Catherine LaFrance, Laurie Turnbull, Genevieve Tellier again for your insight, your knowledge. Love having spent the afternoon with you. And to you at home, thank you for spending the afternoon for us. We'll see you again tomorrow.